Okay, thanks very much for coming, people, today, especially as it is very, very nice outside, and I'm sure you'd maybe want to be somewhere else, but no. I don't want to be. No. I'm where I want to be. So I'd just like to extend a very, very Truth Seekers Northeast welcome to Andrew Johnson, and I'm just looking forward to this pop talk. So without further ado, I'll just hand it over.
Just to reiterate what Dave said, thanks very much for coming out on this warm afternoon. I think it's going to be a bit cooler tomorrow. I've got quite a lot of material, so I'm going to adopt quite a sort of broad and shallow approach rather than the narrow and deep. So you're going to have to hang on to your hats because I've got probably about 4 hours of material here, so I'm going to skip over quite a bit. There's books at the back there, paperbacks, £10 each. I'm just doing those up. I don't expect you to buy them. It's only if you want to, because they are all available as free downloads in PDF form from my website, checktheevidence.com. So if you got any questions about today, or anything related to today, then please do remember that website, checktheevidence.com. You can go onto there, click on contact, send me an email, or you can find me on Facebook. Although there might be 10 million Andrew Johnsons, with it being a it's a fairly common name, but you should be able to work out the right one, hopefully. So that's the books, and I've got 2 copies of the Where the Tales Go book, Dr. Judy Wood's book, which I'll mention in this context, in the context of this presentation, I should say. And so I've got a bit of introductory video.
We are going to see more and more of these visitors from space, and that before too long the evidence will be incontrovertible, that you will have on your TV screens and on your movie screens concrete evidence that the ships are here and that they are real and they're not fantastic things which have been cooked up to make a movie.
We can say that the recent sightings are in no way connected with any secret development by any agency of the United States.
There's nothing to hide at all.
The expression flying saucers is a catch-all term for unusual lights appearing in the sky.
We've been able to explain them as hoaxes, as erroneously identified friendly aircraft, as meteorological or electronic phenomena, or as light aberrations.
None of the evidence that I've examined would indicate any proof at all that we are being visited by extraterrestrials.
There is absolutely no evidence.
We have not been hiding anything.
Personally, I'm convinced that there must be many, many higher civilizations in this enormous and incredibly ancient universe of ours.
And with a nice interjection from Windows there at the end, that was well timed, wasn't it? Watch that film. I don't think it's on YouTube. You might find it on Netflix or something. Paul David's 1994 Roswell TV movie, excellent film. So, in case you don't know who I am, I currently work part-time as a tutor for the Open University. I'm not doing this in association with them or anything. They don't really care or know about, how much I've been involved in the sort of alternative knowledge scene now for the last sort of 15 years. I grew up in Skipton in North York, it's not ever so far from here, and I was born in Keighley. I went to Lancaster University, did a degree in computer science and physics there, worked in software engineering for about 20 years on and off. So basically I've been involved in a lot of analysis and fault finding work in software and development work as well. And then I began researching the UFO topic intensively in 2003 when I discovered Stephen Greer's Disclosure Project, which I've written quite a bit about in my acknowledged book. And then I set up the website, which I mentioned a few minutes ago, in 2005, and it's just developed from there. And this was one of the last pieces of sort of paid software development I did back in 2009 for Toshiba. And when my friend sent me this little bit of equipment, which was like a control module, I was surprised to see that it had a number on it of SA911. So That was a bit weird. So today we're going to say got quite a lot of information spanning sort of what's in 3 of my books, so we're going to look at UFOs and ET type stuff. We've got quite a few UFO related video clips, some of which I'll have to clip over. I'll mention a little bit about UFO and films, UFO and ETs in films and cinema. I've got a particularly interesting clip about that. And I've also got, you might have seen the skulls here, so I'm going to talk about this thing a little bit as well, but there's a whole other presentation on that which I recommend you go and look at. If we get time, I'm going to go into the crop circle phenomenon as well, because there's recently the picture that's on the cover of my book was reposted on Facebook, interestingly enough, but not in relation to my book, so I'm not quite sure why that was. But I think this this particular picture is and crop formation is very, very interesting, more interesting than most of the others, for reasons I'll try and explain. I'm also going to look at the way that prominent UFO researchers ignore evidence, and I'm going to look at the impact of the ignorance on the so-called disclosure process. Certain topics here, like for example the skull, very, very few researchers actually talk about, despite it being among the most compelling evidence of what surely must be alien life, having been here. So yeah, I've got 3 books that are sort of pulled bits on from this presentation. Secrets in the Solar System, which is anomalies in the solar system, all based on NASA data and ESA data and stuff. Finding the Secret Space Program, which is about anti-gravity technology development, and a bit, it's got 1 or 2 UFO cases in there as well. And then the one that I finished in about May this year is called Acknowledged, which is a perspective on the matters of UFOs, aliens and crop circles. So in each book I look at evidence relating to the phenomena and how that evidence has been covered up and why people are probably not talking about it. So a total of about 1,000 pages of information in those 3 books, something like that. So just to sort of dwell on, why do people come to these events? Why are you here? I'm not putting out a questionnaire, but why are you here? Why do you come to these events? Is it for entertainment? Is it because it interests you? Is it because you're unhappy with what you see in the mainstream? Are you curious? Is it a combination of these things? Or do you want to know the truth about things? And can you actually get to a point where you say, yeah, I know what the truth is about this particular thing now? Can you get to that point?
Everything apart from the entertainment, I would say.
Okay.
Yeah, cheap energy as well.
And just a point at the bottom, yeah, good point. Is it offensive in a community of truth seekers to say that you know the truth about something? Which is not so much in relation to some of this, yeah, in relation to some of this, but particularly with 9/11 research, some people seem to find it offensive that people like me say, yes, I know parts of what happened, and I know why they've covered it up, and I know how they've covered it up. So, again, following on in this theme, I'm going to read out a quote here. Between the people and the government today lies a double standard of morality. Anything remotely scientific has become, by government definition, a matter of military security first, hence of secrecy. Something which does not breed security, but fear. If we see anything unusual, even in the skies, we the people must either freeze our lips like a Russian peasant at the sight of the commissar, or give our names, addresses, business connections and testimony to be screened and filtered by anonymous intelligence officers. Feared and respected by many people, these anonymous creatures can deny what we say, ridicule what we say, and sometimes, and in increasing number of countries, jail us for what we say, especially if our timing does not match to the second their intended official pronouncements on the subject. And I was just having a conversation in there with somebody, I won't say who it is, but I think it's sort of scarily applicable. And so anyone familiar with this quote, I'm guessing no, but this is where it comes from. Behind the Flying Saucers by Frank Scully, written in 1950. 1950. Almost 70 years ago. So I think he saw what was going on then, and it's got even worse since then. Okay, so I'm going to start off just by talking about a little bit about official investigations into the UFO phenomenon and why really, next to meaningless really, and will continue to be so. And then throughout this presentation I'm primarily going to use the term UFO, by which in most cases I really mean craft of extraterrestrial origin. This is the most commonly used term. It's most commonly used to mean craft of extraterrestrial origin, even though that's not what the abbreviation means. Of course the term means unidentified flying object, yes, and it was coined by Edward J. Ruppelt in 1952. So before that was the term flying saucers. The coining of this term itself includes the idea that the object cannot be properly characterised, when in some cases I think that is not applicable. You can characterise it as a craft of extraterrestrial origin, in some cases. And there have been several formal investigations that have already been done. There was Project Sign in 1948, Project Grudge, 1949 to the 1950s, Project Blue Book, which is the one that most people have heard of, and there's a new TV series of that name now, which is part of another psychological operation. And that ran in the 1950s and 1960s. And then there's the Condon Report, which was basically a total debunking attempt. And less well known in the 20th century is Project Saucer, and that was initiated by the US DoD in January 1948. So, and the report was published via Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, which is a name that comes up again and again if you study the literature on this subject. In addition, 2 sets of congressional hearings took place in the USA in 1966 and 1968. So yes, there have been officially paid for and sanctioned investigations in the US into this phenomenon, not so much in the UK. The other one that people are less familiar with is a more recent, and it's from France in 1999, and it's called the Cometa Report. It was never officially translated into English. You can get from my website and other places the English version. It's about 90 pages long, and the title was UFOs in Defence, What Must Be Prepared For. And yeah, I've said all that. So the study was carried out over several years by an independent group of former auditors at the Institute of Advanced Studies for National Defence, or IHEDN, and by qualified experts from various fields before its public release, and it was sent to French Presidents Jacques Chirac, a name you probably remember, and to Prime Minister Lionel Jospin. In the conclusion it states, the extraterrestrial hypothesis is far from the best scientific hypothesis. It certainly has not been categorically proven, but the strong presumptions exist in its favour, and if it is correct, it is loaded with consequences, you bet. So they didn't, obviously they weren't committal, but again you can read the report. So, but what's been the result of the publication of these reports? I mean, the Cometa Report wasn't even translated into English. Has it changed the way that media operates in relation to the UFO ET issue? Did they change the way academia operates in relation to the issue in universities and stuff? Has it changed the way that this subject is treated by professors and doctors and so forth in, say, physics, astronomy? When these reports came out, were they featured in programs which were, science programs? Well, that might have happened in the 1960s, but not in the last sort of 20 or 30 years that I'm aware of. So, this is Lord Peter Hill Norton, who did an investigation into the Rendlesham case, and he was a former, he was an admiral of the fleet. He was a top military guy in the UK, and he said in about 1999, this should be the subject of rigorous scientific investigation and not the subject of rubbishing by the tabloid newspapers. I've got some examples of that in my book, and how I tried to sort of get some serious attention put onto the Rendlesham story, and the guy just blew it off as a helicopter landing in the forest, without doing any investigation into that. But I don't think that Hill Norton realised the mechanisms of perception management and the control of certain information. It's just as effectively applied in the university environment, the academia, as it is in just about any organisation you can think of. So just in the media and in news reporting. And he also did not know of the defence applications that had been undertaken from the information they got from the crafts at Roswell and things like that. So I'm now going to review some of the cases and evidence that I've come across. I mean, you could spend weeks just doing this. If you want it, but I've just chosen a few cases which I think are significant. I covered some of them in the book. And let's just see if I can...
Possibly one of the most interesting aspects of the study of flying saucers, beyond the realization that they are real and extraterrestrial, is their philosophy. What manner of creatures build and fly them? What do they look like? How do they think? Are their ideas and ideals similar to ours? Could we understand them? All these and many other questions plague the serious investigator.
So this is Wilbert Smith, and that was recorded, I think, in 1958, 60 years ago. He was superintendent of radio regulations in Canada, and he held 37 patents when he died. His name does come up a little bit. But this guy started off as a skeptic of flying saucers. He didn't believe in them at first. After a few years of research, he came out with some extraordinary information, which was embodied, some of which was embodied in this 1950 top secret memo, which was found in the University of Ottawa archives by Nick Velasquez, and it was declassified in 1979. So it was discovered before the so-called, anybody that's heard of the MJ12 documents, this was before all of that, and it was written before that as well. And in the memo, Smith wrote, the matter about the flying saucer issue, the matter is the most highly classified subject in the United States government, rating higher than the H-bomb. Flying saucers exist, their modus operandi is unknown, but concentrated effort is being made by a small group headed by Dr. Vannevar Bush, and the entire matter is considered by the United States to be of tremendous significance. 1950. I was further informed that the United States authorities are investigating along quite a number of lines which might possibly be related to the saucers, such as mental phenomena. Mental phenomena. What does that mean? And I gather that they are not doing too well, since they indicated that if Canada is doing anything at all in geomagnetics, they would welcome a discussion with suitably accredited Canadians. So Smith's talking about the craft that they'd found having something to do with mental phenomena, which is basically to do with thought control. This is in 1950. Now in Ryan Wood's book, Magic Eyes Only, about UFO crashes, it reproduces the Special Operations Manual part of it. And it says, so what I'm trying to show you here is something which corroborates this part of what's in Smith's memo. All information relating to MJ12 has been classified Magic Eyes Only and carries a security level 2 points above that of top secret. So we've seen the same thing as what was written in Smith's memo in a different document. The reason for this has to do with the consequences that may arise not only from the impact upon the public should the existence of such matters become general knowledge, but also the danger having such advanced technology has been recovered by the Air Force fall into the hands of unfriendly foreign powers. No information is released to the public press, and the official government position is that no special group such as MJ12 exists. So this is what Wilbert Smith was told by Robert Sarbacher, essentially. So had Sarbacher, Sarbacher's another researcher, I've got another slide from him in a minute, had Sarbacher seen this document, the Special Operations Manual, and again you can get that online, that Special Operations Manual, it's quite interesting. It talks about the recovery of extraterrestrial material.
Hello? Dr. Sarbacher? Yes? Hi, Sam Friedman up in Fredericton, New Brunswick, Canada. Okay, that looks good. Let's see, early 50s. Now, the notes that I sent you from Wilbert Smith, you do remember talking to him? Yeah, the Canadian. Yeah, very good. Okay, his notes were 1950, and let me see the exact date. September 15th were his notes, 1950. He asked you a question that you didn't answer at that time, which was rather offensive. If you've just given me the answer in a sentence. He quotes you as saying, yes, it's classified 2 points higher even than the H-bomb. In fact, the most highly classified subject in the U.S. government at the present time. And that was the latest idea. Why? Well, it seems silly to me. Well, his next comment, that was supposedly what you said, and then his next comment was, may I ask the reason for the classification?
And you said, you may ask, but I can't tell you. Well, I didn't know. Oh, okay, not because of this crash. There's no mention of a crash per se in this note. Do you think it could have happened after that? I don't know. There may have been several of them. There was some talk where, huh?
So I know that wasn't very clear, but that was Sarbacker recorded in 1983, confirming that he gave that information to Wilbert Smith, and he's talking about crashes. He had knowledge of crashes. So Sarbacker, there's a lot of text on this slide, which I'll try and summarise. Sarbacker, basically, he was a very well-respected scientist in the 1940s and 50s, and he had built a quite advanced lab. You know, he's sort of like Robert Oppenheimer type of scientist. Oppenheimer was one of the scientists that worked on the H-bomb. And what he was actually doing, according to his son, was he was tasked with putting a camera on a missile. So the US Air Force had these missiles they were firing off, and they wanted to put cameras on them, because the missile was the only thing that they had that was fast enough that had a chance of catching up to a flying saucer. Sarbacker was asked if he could set up a project where he could put a camera on the missiles. That's what his son said. So they wanted to track the UFOs. This was the Air Force back in the sort of 50s. So yeah, so Sarbacker, you know, he knew about the secret research by the Air Force into the UFO issue. Now, Smith died at the age of 52 from cancer of the lower bowel. You may read that he died of brain cancer. That's not true. And he told his family that they would try and come and get his files. So what happened was the files were kept in secret by his wife Merle, and eventually passed to another chap called Arthur Bray in Ottawa, and then that eventually was passed on to Grant Cameron, who ran a website which I'll mention later on. So what Smith did, and again I'm skipping over this quite quickly, but over several years he got in touch with the boys topside, he called them. He didn't call them aliens, he didn't call them ETs or extraterrestrials. He called them boys topside, he called them people from outside. And he was given instructions how to build 3 bits of hardware: a binding meter, a caduceus coil, and a magnetic sync circuit which extracts energy from the Earth's magnetic field. And he also built an anti-gravity experiment, which I've written about in the Secret Space Program book. And he set up a saucer detection station at Shirley Bay in Canada in 1954, and they did detect something in August of 1954, and the project was shut down the next day, or 2 days later. So Smith knew a lot of stuff.
As far as I know, our group in Ottawa are the only group that has actually taken the information which was given to us by the boys outside and translated it into hardware that works. Much information has been given to us through various channels, but people just talk about it, they don't do anything about it. I think that is deplorable. I think when they give us information, the least we can do is to show our good faith by trying at least to convert that information into hardware. We have built 2 items of hardware on their instructions that I'm rather proud of.
So that's where he starts talking about the coil. So that's just Smith talking in 1958 about the things that he built. The binding meter was to measure binding forces in the environment, and he'd sort of got involved in investigating air crashes because there were some aircraft that seemed to have come apart in mid-air, and Smith suspected it was something to do with binding forces, which is it's a concept that's not really recognised in current physics. And I won't go into it now, but I think he was right. And Smith actually said that they were sent bits of hardware from the US that had come off craft that had been shot at or crash landed or broken up in some way. And Wilbert Smith's son, Jim Smith, I'm going to skip over some of these clips. He talks about how he handles some of these pieces from the craft that have been sent to Wilbert Smith to analyse. So they know stuff. They know a lot of stuff. It's not about lights in the sky. Smith also told his son, we were told about the bodies that Wilbert Smith had seen when he was personally invited by the US military. We were simply told that he saw the bodies, and from the impression that I received, it was only for a short time, minutes not hours. Mr. Smith, and this is when they had a meeting at the Montreal Flying Saucer Club, which was the group that Smith ran. I think it continued for a few years after Smith's death. Mr. Smith described to his wife the dead occupants having been approximately 4.5 to 5 feet in height, greyish-blue tint to the skin, large eyes, small slit for a mouth, 4 long fingers with no thumbs. And his son Jim Smith, in an interview in about 2004 or 2005, I've got a clip here, but the audio is pretty poor actually, it's low quality. But he basically confirms that when his father was on his deathbed, he told his son, yeah, I saw the bodies, they were aliens. And that was confirmed by Jim Smith in about 2004. Now, Smith became so sure of what he found that you know, he realised towards the end of his life, I think this is 1958, he basically said, well, there's no point in investigating now. I know what's going on with this group. These guys have come to the Earth, they've given me information, I've built stuff, I've corresponded with people, other people have seen ships landing, aliens getting out. It's all real, it's all true. So, and he said, well, what's the point in investigating? You know, I know this much now. He said, there's no point in ploughing and reploughing the same field. And that's how I feel. That's how I feel. You know, I know certain stuff now is true, as far as I'm concerned, which I'm going to go on to. And Smith felt the same. And he'd been investigating this probably for about 8 or 9 years by this point. He's a clever guy. Let's see.
In 1965, Gordon Cooper was the last American astronaut to go up into space alone.
Now the action that I have taken is to turn off my O5 switch gears.
He orbited the planet 22 times.
I think it's those of you that know me know that I've always spoken honestly and straightforward to you. I can do so today.
10 years earlier, while stationed at Edwards Air Force Base, Cooper witnessed an event that has yet to be explained nearly 50 years later. He was supervising the filming of a precision landing facility for F-86 fighter jets. Suddenly, a saucer-like craft flew directly over the cameraman. 3 landing gear apparatus opened, and the object landed on the dry lake bed.
They're just typical saucer shape, double lenticular shape, metallic. And they went out, picked up their cameras and moved on out toward him, filming. And he lifted off, put the gear back in the well, and climbed out at a very high rate of speed and disappeared.
Cooper had the film footage of the strange craft developed. By the time it returned from processing, he had gone up through the ranks to report the incident.
I think it was the colonel telling me to, you know, when the film arrived at my desk, to put it in the carrier pouch. There would be a courier there at my office by that time already, and they'd arranged for him to fly in our base airplane back to Washington with these films.
Did you watch the film?
We didn't have a chance to run it. I had a chance to hold it up to the window and look at it. It was certainly a good film.
After the developed film was sent by plane to Washington, it was never seen or heard of again.
Did you ever keep in touch with anybody about it or discuss that?
How would I keep in touch with anybody about it? There's no way within the military or within the government of keeping track of something that is classified unless you're directly involved in it, and I was not.
It's pretty clear to me. Flying saucer lands at Edwards Air Force Base, Cooper's team films it, and it's never seen again. I mean, what is it that's possibly be misinterpreted about that? Yeah, you don't get that story. I think it was on a couple of programs about 10 years ago. That documentary was called Out of the Blue. And there's several versions on YouTube. I think they've done like an edited director's cut and things like that. It's one of the best documentaries on the subject if you've got 90 minutes. Out of the Blue by James Fox on YouTube. Watch that. And there's some pretty compelling information. I've probably got one or two other bits and bobs from that in here as well. So yeah, so we've got flying saucer landed. We know that they've either been shot at or they've crashed. What about aliens? Well, this is, to me, is one of the most compelling cases.
Just after sunset on the evening of November 5th, 1975, a 7-man crew was piling into a 4-wheel drive vehicle after finishing a day of woodcutting near the tiny northern Arizona community of Snowflake. One of the 7 men was Travis Walton, whose curiosity that night plunged him into a living nightmare he would never forget. Just before leaving the work area, the men in the Jeep watched a glowing object emerge from behind the trees. Travis opened a door to get a better view and continued watching, stunned with his companions.
The thing was about 90 feet away, about 20 feet in diameter, about 8 feet high. It was glowing a golden color, kind of like molten metal. I couldn't hear anything at first. It must have been because when I got closer I could hear it, but it was a high-pitched intermittent sound and a low rumbling sound. It sounded like machinery or, a heavy mechanical sound. Very difficult to describe.
Travis got out of the vehicle and moved toward the object, despite cries from his friends for him to return. Walton assumed by the time he could get any closer, the object would be gone.
Just as I got up close, it started to move with a sort of a rocking motion, kind of like a spinning top, like when it's slowing down to fall over, except it wasn't spinning, it the same side stayed toward me. And when it started to move, it got real loud, and that really scared me. I jumped down behind a log, and I looked up at this thing, and I decided then I was in a lot of danger and I was going to get the heck out of there. And I raised up to go. It's the last thing I remember. I raised up and I started to turn, and I was just about in a high crouch when wham, I felt a numbing shock hit me. It kind of like in the head, and I went out. I was knocked unconscious.
His 6 co-workers, however, saw what Travis had not. A slender beam of intense light which shot from the craft and lifted Walton off his feet, knocking him to the ground. The rest of the crew sped away in panic, looking back to see the craft take off. But when they returned to see if Travis was all right, he was nowhere to be found. When Travis finally came to, he was weak, groggy, and in pain. Above him was a light. He assumed he was in a hospital bed, but as his blurred vision became clearer, he discovered he was wrong.
I felt something pressing on my chest. My shirt and my jacket pushed up, and there was this thing laying across it. It was about 4 or 5 inches thick. The thing extended down over my rib cage and down to my belt. And when I looked up, I saw this thing. It was gray. And I looked past the edge of it, and I saw something white. My eyes weren't focusing. Again, at first I thought it was a doctor, white mask and cap. But when I got to where I could see, I saw this thing, and I just came unglued. I looked around me, and there was 3 of them. I just panicked. I became hysterical.
As his eyes became accustomed to the surroundings, Travis saw his captors in more detail.
They were about 4 feet 10. Had very large heads. No hair on their heads. No eyebrows. No whiskers or anything like that. They had very large eyes. Those eyes are something that really bothered me worse than anything. The rest of their features were small. It was like small ears, small nose, small mouth, hardly any lips if they had any lips. I never saw them open their mouth. But they were wearing a long coverall type things. They were orangish tan. When I saw them, I struck out. I wasn't really a blow. I was so weak. I pushed this one on my right, and he fell back into another one. They felt kind of marshmallow, kind of like fat, Whereas, when you push against somebody with muscle, it feels differently. But they seemed light, unexpectedly. And I jumped off the table there and staggered over into the corner. There was a bench across the wall, and I leaned there. I was really weak, and I was so scared, I was shaking, and and they started towards me, and I started just screaming at them, you know, telling them to keep away from me. And I reached over and I grabbed a thing off of the table. There was a bunch of things there, and there was a clear tube about maybe an inch in diameter, I don't know, a foot and a half long. And I thought, it wasn't heavy like glass, and it was too light for a club, and so I wanted to defend myself, and so I hit it against the table to break it, and maybe get a sharp point, but it didn't break. But I lashed out at them with it, and I kept screaming. They only took a couple of steps, and they stopped.
After the creatures departed, Travis left the room through the same door, but went down the hallway in the opposite direction.
I came to a doorway on my right, and I went into this, I didn't go right in, I looked in, and it was a round room, a domed room, with a chair in the middle. And it was really funny about this room. It's really strange. It looked like, you know, I could see the walls and everything, the same as everything else in the place. It was all just this matte gray metal look. But when I went towards the chair, I didn't go towards the chair right away. I walked around towards the side because the chair was high-backed, and I was afraid that there might be one of those things sitting in that chair. So I went around there, and when I could see that there was nobody in the chair, I walked over to it. But the closer I got to the chair, the darker the room seemed. And I could start seeing points of light, like the stars. There was buttons there. And I did a stupid thing, I pushed some, you know, hoping to open the door or something. But when that didn't work, well, I got scared of doing that too, because it made the stars move. I turned, and there was a man standing in the doorway I came through. And this guy, I mean, he appeared human to me, you know, which was a big relief. And I ran up there and started asking him all kinds of questions. And just smiled, kind of tolerant-like. And I assumed that maybe he couldn't hear me because he had the helmet on his head. A clear helmet. And so when he motioned for me, he took me by the arm. I went with him. I assumed I was being rescued.
Travis was led out of the craft and into a large hangar, where more human-like figures were present. He remembers their appearance this way.
They passed, you know, on the street, but they had a strange thing to their eyes. They were a light color, a golden hazel, you know? And they had a resemblance to each other, like a family, but not identical. There was one of them that was a woman, I could tell. Had longer hair and female shape. One of the men and the woman came over there and they put me on the table, and they put a mask over my face, and I started to resist, and they held me on the table and they put this mask on my face, and I reached up to pull it away, and before I could, everything went black.
Meanwhile, the other members of the woodcutting crew had reported Walton missing. Local police organized a search party, but no trace of Walton was found. The next thing he remembered, Travis was lying on the side of a road outside Heber, Arizona, 12 miles from Snowflake.
When I first regained consciousness, I was laying on the roadway, well, to the side of the road, more off than on, and my head was on my arm, and I saw a light, and I looked up in time to see it go off, which I think was either a light going off or a hatch closing, perhaps. Then I saw that this object hovering there. It was a flattened sphere. I mean, it was shaped like a disc, but it was very shiny, chrome-like. I could see that reflecting everything around there, but not giving off any light. It was dark. And it was just there for a second, hovering about 4 feet off the ground, and then it just shot straight up. It was incredible how quick, without making a sound.
Travis staggered to a phone booth to call his family, who at first did not believe it was really him. But once convinced, they came to take him home. On the way, Travis received yet another shock.
We were riding back in, and they said something about everybody being worried about me. I can't remember the exact conversation, but I said, well, you know, it must have been a bad couple hours or something to reference the time or something like that. And they said, Travis, You've been gone for 5 days.
While recuperating, Travis was able to remember most of what had happened to him. A series of hypnotic regressions with Dr. James Harder from the University of California, however, enabled Walton to recall things with less anxiety and more detail.
That's a very well-known story. Some of you in the room are probably familiar with it, but Travis has told the same story since 1975, when it happened, November the 5th. I met him in 2016. There's a photo of he and I in the book. So that really happened, and I have no reason to doubt that Travis was taken up into the craft and he was helped by the aliens to recover. But this is how they put it into the Hollywood movie, with him being taken by the aliens, dragged by the feet through the ship, and having things stuck in him and this rubber sheet put over him so he couldn't breathe. That's the Hollywood version of this account. That's the Hollywood version from 1993. I wonder why that would be. Okay, so are we getting subliminal disclosure? A lot of people suggest this, that we are being told, you know, the sorts of things I'm telling you in films and songs and things, and I've got a couple of examples I'd like to just mention here. Anyone know who the first abductee was, UFO abductee? Somebody pointed this out to me a few years ago.
Oh, that wasn't a bit nice. You have made me very angry.
What infantile minds? How Buck Rogers can you get?
There he is, Bugs Bunny, the first alien abductee. Who'd have thought that? I know it's funny and everything, but there might be more serious side to it as well. And you know, we've all probably seen, I would say, these sorts of films, and particularly it started up in the 50s, which of course came after the Roswell incident and all the various flying saucer flaps. Generally, you get the aliens are considered to be evil. But I think in 1977 we had a bit of a different film that you might remember seeing, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which I haven't done a lot of research into that, except to say that the ending might be based on a real event where they play in all the tones and they have communication. I've got a little bit about that in the book, but there's another bit which I think is a more interesting thing, which I've got another clip for now. In 2009, Grant Cameron reported that it had been confirmed that after a private showing in the White House, Ronald Reagan leaned over, clapped Spielberg on the shoulder, and quietly commented, "You know, there aren't 6 people in this room who know how true this really is," as in the story of extraterrestrial film. And this was seemingly also said in 1989 by Bill Cooper.
The next really important occurrence was the fact that in 1949, again near Roswell, 2 discs crashed. They recovered 5 alien bodies from these discs. They scoured the area by foot patrol, by jeep patrol, and by aircraft reconnaissance, and discovered an alien alive from the crash, wandering in the desert. They captured him. He was designated EB, Extraterrestrial Biological Entity. EB was taken to Los Alamos, where he was placed in a Faraday-shielded environment because he had the ability to read the thoughts and transmit thoughts to people outside of where he was being held captive. The next most important thing that happened after they found EB, it came a few years later. EB became ill, and they tried to save him. They were unsuccessful. They didn't know how to go about it. But in an attempt to save him, them, and also in an attempt to gain favor with this technologically superior race, they began broadcasting out into space for help. We have one of your people here who crashed in one of your ships. We're trying to save his life. He's dying. Please help us save his life. By doing that, they hoped, number one, to make contact, number two, to make friendly contact, number three, that the aliens would see us as a benevolent people trying to help one of theirs and would not attempt to destroy us or hurt us. Evie died in June of 1952. As of the time of Evie's death, we had not had any answer to the message that we had sent out into space. The movie that you saw, called E.T., is the story of Evie. They have changed some things around to make it more palatable to you. The beginning of the story, he's running around in the desert. He's lost. The government is chasing him. In the real story, the government caught him. In the movie, the little boy gets him. And they form this symbiotic relationship. They're each getting something from the other. And it's a wonderful story. Well, in real life, the real life Evie was assigned an Air Force officer to watch over him, become his friend, get as much information from him as he could, be his mentor, be his captor. And the same symbiotic relationship developed between Evie and this Air Force officer, to the point where when Evie died, the Air Force officer cried. He was deeply hurt. He'd lost a dear friend, because he had been with Evie literally night and day since they had found him. In the movie, Evie gets very ill, and everybody's very concerned. And the little boy plays the role of the Air Force officer. And you see that he cries. But in the film, he lives. E.T. Call Home was Project Sigma, to attempt to make communications with the aliens to come and help save the life of Evie.
I was there.
You were there? Okay, so is it... The story that I heard was that when Reagan saw it, he started talking about how close to reality it was, and he was quickly ushered out of the room. Is that true?
No, he wasn't ushered out of the room. He was the President of the United States. Nobody could usher Ronald Reagan out of the room. It was in the White House screening room.
Yeah.
And Reagan got up to thank me for bringing the film to show him, to show the President, the First Lady, and all of their guests, which included Sandra Day O'Connor in her first week as a justice of the Supreme Court, and it included some astronauts. I think Neil Armstrong was there. I'm not 100% certain, but it was an amazing evening, and he just stood up and he looked around the room almost like he was doing a head count, and then he said, "I want to thank you for bringing E.T. to the White House. We really enjoyed your movie." And then he looked around the room and he said, "And there are a number of people in this room who know that everything on that screen is absolutely true." And he said it without smiling. But he said that, and everybody laughed, by the way. The whole room laughed because he presented it like a joke, but he wasn't smiling as he said it.
Yeah. There you are. Maybe the US government know a lot more than they're letting on. A lot more. And then you get things like this. Yeah, the Fire in the Sky, I've mentioned that. They changed Walton's abduction experience. You can see that for yourself if you go and watch that film and listen to what Walton said. This film that came out in '97, Contact, that again seemed to introduce some other concepts like consciousness and dimensional travel, which also comes into this topic if you read across the sort of literature. We had things like Independence Day, which had perhaps a different angle on it, which again, I think I've got another clip of, which I might play. But Contact, interestingly enough, was Carl Sagan's only novel. All the other books he wrote were, factual books. And I've got some information on Carl Sagan in my Finding the Secret Space Program book. Carl Sagan was actually involved in a project in 1959 to actually set a nuclear bomb off on the moon. So he must have had a top secret clearance in 1959. There's a document that you can find which was released about 2 or 3 years ago with his name on it. I've got a copy of that in the book. So Sagan, he knew a lot more than what he put in his Cosmos series, and I've got a bit more about Sagan in my books. So yeah, another sort of short set of clips here. Yeah, do you think these people are going to disclose?
Perhaps we need some outside universal threat. I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world. And yet, I ask you, is not an alien force already among us? What could be more alien to the universal aspirations of our peoples than war and the threat of war? And your children. I couldn't help at one point in my discussions privately with General Secretary Gorbachev, when you stop to think that we're all God's children wherever we may live in the world, I couldn't help but say to him, just think how easy his task and mine might be in these meetings that we held if suddenly there was a threat to this world from some other species, from another planet, outside in the universe. We'd forget all the little local differences that we have between our countries, and we would find out once and for all that we really are all human beings here on this earth together.
I got a letter from 13-year-old Ryan from Belfast. Now, Ryan, if you're out in the crowd tonight, here's the answer to your question. No. As far as I know, an alien spacecraft did not crash in Roswell, New Mexico in 1947. And Ryan, if the United States Air Force did recover alien bodies, they didn't tell me about it either, and I want to know.
The godmother of your daughter, Shirley MacLaine, writes in her new book that you sighted a UFO over her home in Washington State. Did you see a UFO?
I did, and the rest of the account, it was an unidentified flying object, okay? It's like, it's unidentified. I saw something.
You know, also at this debate earlier this week, there was a bit of a humorous moment when Congressman Dennis Kucinich said that he had seen a UFO. But that's something that you're intimately familiar with yourself.
Well, a UFO is an unidentified flying object, and when I was back as a peanut farmer and the head of a lounge club in the southwest Georgia, I and about 25 others saw something in the air that changed colors and was round and came and left. We couldn't figure out what it was. It was unidentified as far as we were concerned, but I think it's impossible, in my opinion, some people disagree, to have space people from other planets or other stars to come in this say. I don't think that's possible.
Well, it's certainly proof, though, Mr. President, that you can see a UFO and go on to become President of the United States, so maybe it's not over for Congressman Kucinich yet.
And I've got another short section of clips as well.
We're back. Manny Pacquiao's on the way. President Bill Clinton is here with us, so if I was president, and I won't be, let's be honest, the first thing I would do after putting my hand on that Bible and taking that oath to serve the country is, I wouldn't even probably finish the oath. I would run to the White House. I demand to see all the classified files on the UFOs. Because I want to know. I'd want to know what has been going on. Did you do that?
Sort of.
Sort of.
Yeah, we had... I think it was at the beginning of my second term, we had the anniversary of Roswell.
You waited that long?
I did.
Wow.
Well, I didn't. And then there's also Area 51. You remember there was a great sci-fi movie where there was an alien kept deep under the ground in Area 51? So first I had people go look at the records on Area 51 to make sure there was no alien down there. And people thought that because everybody who works there has to stop about an hour away and put on special clothing and then drive in and out. And that's because a lot of our stealth technology is made there. We know that now, but there are no aliens there. So then when the Roswell thing came up, I knew we'd get you know, gazillions of letters. So I had all the Roswell papers reviewed, everything.
If you saw that there were aliens there, would you tell us?
Yeah.
You would?
But I think, look, what do we know? We know now we live in an ever-expanding universe. We know that there are billions of stars and planets literally out there, and the universe is getting bigger. We know from our fancy telescopes that just in the last 2 years, more than 20 planets have been identified outside our solar system that seem to be far enough away from their suns and dense enough that they might be able to support some form of life. So it makes it increasingly less likely that we're alone.
Oh, you're trying to give me a hint that there are aliens.
No, I'm trying to tell you I don't know.
Oh.
But if we were visited someday, I wouldn't be surprised. I just hope that it's not like Independence Day.
Yeah, right.
That it's a, you know, a conflict.
Well, now we have friendly
Maybe the only way to unite this incredibly divided world of ours. They're out there. We better think of how all the differences among people on Earth would seem small if we felt threatened by a space invader. That's the whole theory of independence.
You're right. You're
Everybody
right.
gets together and makes nice, and you know.
You and Bill O'Reilly would be hiding in a bunker together.
Oh, no, he every mean thing he ever said about me. I don't care. Look at that.
This is something I feel like, if I was the president, and it's unlikely that that is ever going to happen. You never know. If I was the president...
It was unlikely that I was going to be president.
The moment I was inaugurated, my hand would just, it'd still be hot from touching the Bible, and I would immediately race to wherever they have the files about Area 51 and the UFOs, and I go through everything to find out what happened. Did you do that?
That's why you will not be president. That's the first thing that you would do. The aliens won't let it happen. You reveal all their secrets. They exercise strict control over us.
Now, you know, there are a lot of people that are going to examine your facial expressions here, every twitch, everything, and saying, of course, so did you look? Did you see? Did you explore?
I can't reveal anything.
Oh, really? Because President Clinton said he did go right in, and he did check, and there was nothing.
Well, you know, that's what we're instructed to say.
All right. That's right. When we had your husband, President Clinton, on this show, he said, I asked him about UFOs in Area 51, and if you looked in, because if I was president, that's the first thing I do. I go right into those files and see what was going on.
Right.
And he said that he did do that.
Yes.
And that he didn't find anything.
Well, I'm gonna do it again.
Yeah, why not?
Right? And you know, there's a new name. It's unexplained aerial phenomenon.
Unexplained aerial phenomenon,
Yep,
really?
Yep, UAP. That's the latest nomenclature.
I like the old one. I like UFO. I don't know why.
Well, I think we can use them interchangeably, but I would like us to go into those files and hopefully make as much of that public as possible. If there's nothing there, let's tell people there's nothing there.
What if there is something there?
Well, if there is something there, unless it's a threat to national security, I think we ought to share it with the public.
Well, what if everybody's all hopped up on medical marijuana and everybody gets paranoid? I would love it.
That's why I want more research.
If you share it with me, I'll decide what is the best course of action. I really have my ear to the ground.
Well, I'm more than happy to do that.
So that, you might think it's funny, but that's perception management. Who's the guy? Jimmy Kimmel. He's a comic. They make light of it, they make a joke out of it. They're not really giving you any information. For those that have not looked at Bill and Hillary Clinton, I suggest you put into a search engine, tainted blood from Clinton. Barry Soetoro is probably Barack Obama's real name. If you look at the investigation by Sheriff Arpaio, it shows that Barack Obama's birth certificate was probably a fake. So you should never have been president. And even if it's genuine, it's like the birth certificate is in Hawaii, and it's not in the sort of mainland US. So, and he's going on about, that's what the aliens told us to say. Just makes a complete joke out of it. And when you saw Clinton at Belfast reading out the letter from Ryan, according to research on Grant Cameron's website, Ryan didn't exist. There was no Ryan. So why was Clinton trying to get that into his speech? Okay, so I think, I think we'll probably have a break now, because we're at 15:15, and then I'll probably do one more film clip, it's about a minute long, and then we'll do that after the break, though, I think. So.
Brilliant.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew. Tea, coffee, sandwiches still available.
Okay. Alrighty, so I've just got another clip from the movies. I was quite intrigued by this film. It's like a grown-up version of E.T. And what particularly interested me was some of the themes that are covered in this film from 2011. This is. The audio is pretty quiet on this for some reason, but we'll see what happens.
There's only one world, our world, the world that our Father created.
Hey, if it makes you feel any better, my existence only disproves traditional notions of the Abrahamic Judeo-Christian God, as well as all one world theology. That's all I meant.
Amazing
Listen to me for 1 second, please.
Because in the story, she's a sort of born-again Christian, the girl, female character.
Fuck this. So
she's essentially shown what you might call super consciousness.
Transfer my collective knowledge and experience via tactile second connect bridge.
Oh, wow. Did you do that?
It really touches that of me.
Oh, come on, please.
What do you call that?
Super consciousness. They don't call it that in the film, but that's what I would call it.
Absolutely not. No spoilers.
So everything that I have been told my whole life is just a big fat lie. Do you know how that feels?
Look, just because your truth isn't a true truth doesn't mean there is no true truth.
It's easy for you to say.
It's really not.
So there's no heaven, no hell, no right, no wrong, no sin.
I just wanted to say things. I know.
So that bit there was about all religion is bogus. There's no right, there's no wrong, there's no sin. And in this particular bit, this was also an interesting bit as well, because she has some.
How did you know that?
Got some macular problem.
Mind if I take a look at it for 1 second? What does it say in the Old Testament? An eye for an eye?
Wait, I don't.
It's okay. You can trust me.
I don't know.
Just have a little faith, okay?
So the other thing that comes out there is spontaneous healing. And you don't often see those sorts of themes in these sorts of films. So, the story's it's full of holes and things if you think about it, but I really enjoyed that film. Much more than I expected it to. It's called Paul. It's by Simon Pegg and Nick Frost, 2011. And also, the fact that they got the CGI, so that you can't, you think it's a real character, it's a real physical character. The CGI is that good, which of course has its own issues associated with that. So we've already seen one alien abduction, the Travis Walton case, where one thing I didn't say about that Travis Walton case is there is one of the witnesses who's called Steve Pierce. He, after the thing happened in '75, he kind of freaked out and he just kind of left and he went into hiding. He started using his middle name, which was Jeff. And he resurfaced in 2011 and he did some interviews. And he said that he was offered $10,000 by Philip J. Klass, who was a well-known debunker who died in about or I don't know, 1989 or something, Philip Glass offered Steve Pierce $10,000 to say that the story was a hoax. Where does that sort of money come from? In the acknowledged book, I've got a bit of a, bit on the abduction cases and the sort of problems that you have to face up to with the abduction issue. I cover the Betty and Barney Hill case from 1961, where they were driving back from vacation and they saw a flying saucer in the sky, and then they actually landed and they were abducted. And they didn't initially want to tell their story, but it somehow got out because they spoke about it at a parish meeting that they attended, and then the story got out and they eventually had to write a book which is called The Interrupted Journey. So there, as far as I can tell, their case is real. It really happened. They were taken up in a craft, things were done to them, and they were put back. Travis Walton we've covered. Stan Romanek, he's not that well known. He had a whole sequence of experiences between at least 2000 and 2011, that's all in the book. And he actually filmed an object. In fact, he twice filmed an object in 2003. And then he got into this thing called MILABS, which is the military abduction. I've got a section on that in the book. And the case of, for example, Leah Haley, who thought that she really had been abducted by aliens at first, but then after her own research she came to the conclusion that she was part of a mind control experiment of some kind, run by the military. So there's a lot of crossover there. And these researchers, they've all written books. I don't think any of these researchers have gone across the full picture. I've tried to do that, this sort of broad and shallow approach. They've tended to be narrow and deep, each of these researchers. So I quote some of their research. And one case that you perhaps never heard of, which I came across when I was looking at Grant Cameron's website originally, the presidential UFO, Perez de Cuellar, who was the UN Secretary General. In Bud Hopkins' book 1997, Witnessed, it's alleged that Javier Perez de Cuellar, the former Secretary General of the United Nations, was involved in this Linda Napolitano case where she was abducted in Manhattan at 3 o'clock in the morning from her flat. She floated out the window and there was a beams shone on the building. This was witnessed by multiple people, and I've covered that in the book. And her son was also involved in this incident, and it was her son who identified de Cuellar in photographs when it was being discussed with Bud Hopkins. Well, in Hopkins' book, though, he doesn't name de Cuellar, he just says an official, I don't know what language he uses. But here's a very brief clip by Bud Hopkins.
All of the polls suggest that the majority of the American people believe UFOs are physically real, rather than imaginary or hoaxes or whatnot. I'm standing at exactly the spot where this very strange event was seen at 3 a.m. really on November 30th, 1989. A woman was driving from Brooklyn to New York, right down here in the outer lane. Her car engine died, the lights went out, and she looked over to this building, the one in the distance with a little pointed roof, and at that point she saw a burst of light as a UFO hovering only a few feet above it turned on all of its lights. Two small figures below her and one above her. The light was intense. The woman was terrified and thought, they must be making a movie. This is a film of some sort. And the figures floated up into the UFO, and then the UFO changed its lights, zoomed out across the river and across the bridge and disappeared. And the woman's car lights and engine started back up again. But this is the way it started for her that night.
And there's a lot more to that case. I mean, Stephen Greer's talked about it as well. He talked about it in a lecture he gave about 4 years ago. Again, I go into that in my Acknowledged book, which is free to download, as I say. And then when you start to get and look at the alien abduction issues, this is never far behind. Cattle mutilations that have happened all over the world. If anybody went to Richard Hall's talk about 3, 4, 5 weeks ago, whenever it was, a couple of months now, back in April actually, he covered some more recent incidents. This is really happening. Animals have been mysteriously mutilated, jaw, strips taken out, tongues taken out, soft tissue from the mouth and the anus area and things have been taken out. It's going on all the time. But there's no admission of this. And I recently discovered that if you work as a vet on certain projects, you have to sign the Official Secrets Act. So that, I think, is how they keep this covered up in the UK, at least. Because Richard Hall investigated a number of cases where there should have been an autopsy for a horse, or 2 horses. The autopsy was never released, presumably because it was put under the Official Secrets Act somewhere. And then, of course, you'll get into the DUMS, deep underground military bases, the stories of those all over the world. Places like Rudloe Manor, there's meant to be one. And there's a couple of interesting videos on YouTube where people go poking around at Rudloe Manor, and then they're followed by police and stopped soon after. There's maybe one at Todmorden in Lancashire. There's a guy that I know who said that he thought there was a base under the hills at Todmorden, which wouldn't surprise me. Peasmore, that's the Barry King case. He's talked about there being a base at Peasmore, which there was definitely a base there, but it may not be to do with aliens. That's what Richard Hall came to the conclusion of anyway. Talk of places like Pine Gap, which is in the middle of the Australian continent, so US military base in Australia, not in the US. Talk of these, tunnel boring machines being used. Very good book to read if you're interested in this. The biggest one that you'll hear about is Dulce Base, where they've allegedly got aliens, in this base, and they've got human body parts and nightmare hulls and all of this. And this came up because of the case of Paul Benowitz, who was a very clever electronics technician or inventor, and he actually had contracts with the Air Force. He was supplying sensing equipment to the Air Force back in the 1980s. And he was actually decoding signals which he'd picked up because Paul Benowitz, lived opposite, literally across the road from Kirtland Air Force Base, which I think is in New Mexico. And what they develop at Kirtland Air Force Base, among other things, is directed energy weapons. That's the whole of the story. But they also were developing an optical stealth technology at Kirtland Air Force Base and a novel form of propulsion. And it appears from, if you read this book, which is Greg Valdez's Dulce Base book, Paul Benowitz accidentally discovered parts of 2 classified programs. One was called Project Starfire, which is explained in this book. And so what the Air Force did was they started to feed him information that these signals that he was picking up were alien transmissions. And then he was fed this alien abductee who had apparently been taken to this underground base at Dulce. And there were these aliens running the base, and she was taken there. But there's no other evidence of this really. But there is a base at Dulce. There is an underground base, and it's connected to Los Alamos National Laboratories, which again comes up, multiple times in this sort of research. And Greg Valdez came to the conclusion, because I didn't really explain why he should know what he's talking about. Greg Valdez is the son of a chap called Gabe Valdez, who from sort of mid-70s to late 90s was actually going out to the cattle mutilations in that area, because there were a lot of cattle mutilations happening around the Dulce base. And Greg Valdez, who was his son, would actually go out with his dad to the sites, and he'd see these mutilated cattle and horses. And he describes that in the book, when he was about 10, 11, 12. So he became very familiar with what was going on. And they even found a non-lethal weapon, what they think was a non-lethal weapon, which was left at the site. And they also found some gas masks just discarded next to one of the animals. That's all in the book. So yes, there is an underground base at Dulce, and it appears to be an off-site laboratory for Los Alamos. That's what it is.
Andrew, on that particular base, have you seen the stuff on YouTube about the alien conflict there? In fact, there's
Yes, Dulce Wars. That's almost certainly all disinformation.
Right.
Phil Schneider, who's the one that put those stories out, again, Gabe Valdez goes into Phil Schneider's background, because Gabe Valdez, he'd seen what was going on. This has been going on for like 20, 30 years. He'd seen all this going on. He'd literally got Greg Valdez has got a garage full of information that his father had collected, because apparently he was OCD. He collected everything. So when all these people came out with these stories, like you were saying, with Phil Schneider, and there was another couple of people that came out. Thomas Costello was another one, and there's been one more recently who's called Commander X. I go into that in my book. He basically went and looked at who these people were. He looked into their background, because he was a policeman. Like Phil Schneider was in a lot of debt, and it seems like he didn't make up the majority of his story. So that was disinformation. Yeah, so this is a picture of what they think was a non-lethal weapon that they found near one of the cattle. So it appears they have this advanced technology that they're using around the cattle mutilations. And that's all in the Dulce Base book, which I recommend you read. It's very, very interesting. And when I read that, because that story you said, I heard that probably 15 years ago. It's sort of in what Stanton Friedman calls his grey basket. I thought it could be true, you know, is it true? I don't know, I'm not dissing it. But when I read that Dulce book, I was just like, I was flipping the pages because all of it is in there. It's all explained in there, and you think, oh yeah, that's why they were doing it. So I'd recommend anyone that's heard of that story, read the Dulce Base book by Greg Valdez. There's a PDF. The PDF is linked from my Knowledge book, so you can download it. You can't get it on Amazon. I think it's out of print now. It's self-published. I think he published it himself. Okay, so the big thing is, one of the big things we've sort of touched on is visitation of the Earth. Yes, these craft have been here. Yes, the aliens are here, basically. So a few years ago, this was in 2008, I played this clip at a presentation. I'll just play a bit. I'm not going to play it all because I've got two clips, one of which I'll play all of because it's about a minute long, and this one which I won't play all of.
And after watching this story, I will present you the results.
But this is a real video. Make no mistake. And this was in Texas, I think, somewhere this was filmed. Forget the exact location. But, you know, we know the guy who filmed it.
He recorded the object almost for 3 minutes, very close. The object affected 2 transformers in the area that were burned.
So you can see it's filmed in 2008. We know the guy that filmed it, but I was told by somebody that what had happened is Jaime Maussan, who was the guy that was speaking, the Spanish guy there, he actually released a doctored version of the video. The original video, you'll see, has no distortions in it and none of this sort of snow and noise. Whereas the Jaime Maussan video, which I think is the one on the right, on the left, sorry, has all these sort of artifacts on it. So Maussan, for some reason, said that these artifacts were caused by the magnetic field from the craft. But this is not the case. That part isn't true. So I think this is where you can see the artifacts on the video. So where you saw all the sort of you know, the noise bars coming across, that wasn't in the original video. So Jaime Maussan appeared to, there it goes. So that's the version that Maussan showed, but that's the original. So there were no noise bars. Maybe the craft didn't actually affect the tape that it was filmed on. So he got that wrong. And that's an example of him introducing disinformation. In other words, if somebody pointed out that the original tape didn't show that, then the whole thing is discredited and can be said to be a fake. So this is where you get information and disinformation mixed together. And I didn't know that at first. I was only told by this chap called Dan Banquets, who's a really good researcher, that he told me that, and he sent me that link to that, the original tape. And this is my point. If you make mistakes in your research and they're pointed out to you, you should tell people. This is what I did. And there's been lots of landings and crashes. Of course, the most famous is the Roswell one, but there was another one at Socorro. Kecksburg is another one, 1965. There's a whole video on that you can look online. Very, very well documented case where an object was taken out of a flatbed truck. There were probably hundreds of witnesses to that case in Kecksburg. Shag Harbour, Canada, that's very, very well documented, where an object went into the water and it was seen underwater and divers went down to it, and then it actually travelled up the coast and was next to this ship for about 2 days and then shot into space. Very well documented case. So there's lots of landing and crashes. So all these people say, why haven't they landed anywhere? It's not true, they have. Rendlesham case, that's one of the famous ones. I'm now, having looked at this, and because what conversations that Richard Hall and I have had, it either involved an extraterrestrial craft, but I think it's more likely that this was advanced stealth technology that used, or sorry, secret technology, and it might have been some type of advanced drone that used anti-gravity propulsion, not conventional jet technology or anything like that. And yeah, there's some very and Gary Heseltine's now producing this film called Capel Green, focused around Larry Warren, who's probably not telling the truth. Larry Warren's story is almost certainly not true, and he's been put in to muddy the waters. He's the disinformation that's been put into the Rendlesham case. And like, for example, Jim Penniston, although he's a good witness, he seems like a totally honest guy. In 2011, so we're talking like 30 years after the event happened, he comes out with this story that he received this binary coded message. He got it in his notebook.
So what about Steve Longiero?
Sorry?
Steve Longiero was it the last to go further and he backed up Larry Warren's story?
Yeah, well, a lot of people are trying to back up Larry Warren's story, but Larry Warren is the one that's introduced the aliens into Rendlesham. And Jim Penniston has a kind of a little bit in a sort of tangential way. But I don't think aliens were involved at Rendlesham. I think it was a secret technology, and that's why the Warren story is being put out, to make people think it was aliens. And Larry Warren, for example, has been, he put out a fake image of himself and John Lennon. That was fake. Why would he do that? Because you can clearly see it's fake. The ages are all wrong. And even when, if you look at Georgina Bruni's book, you can't tell the people. Read that book if you haven't read it. She was suspicious of most of the witnesses, but she was more suspicious of Larry than anybody else, because he changed his story more times than anybody else. All the witnesses changed their story slightly, but Larry did it more than anybody else. Yeah, and this film of visitation. Here's one. This is from STS-48. This, I think, was recorded by Martin Stubbs. This is from the Space Shuttle, STS-48. And there was a whole investigation done into this by Jack Casher. Here's an object tootling along, and then there's something fired and it shoots off into space. That's not space debris. Space debris and meteorites don't change direction when events happen around them. I don't know if I've got another clip. This is all NASA footage. This is from the Space Shuttle. This, I think, is STS, it's not STS-75, STS-80, this mission. This is not a very good copy. There are clearer copies than this, and I kept meaning to update this copy. But you see this object coming in, and it lights up, just powers up. It's in the cloud, and this is, as I say, from the Space Shuttle. So they've all been filmed, and I mean they have shown this on TV, but then they at the end they just put a psychiatrist saying also conspiracy theorists just want to believe that there is a UFO cover-up. So it doesn't matter what evidence you put on the screen, as long as you get the psychiatrist saying it's just people who want to believe things. They put that at the end of the programme, not the beginning, or near the end of the programme. That's what message kind of sits in people's consciousness. And this was another good one from Jaime Maussan, and I don't think this is disinformation. I don't think there's any disinformation in this. This is one of the most amazing clips I've ever seen. 22nd of May. Don't worry about the commentary because you'll see the film in a minute. It was filmed by one guy. All these spheres being ejected either side, and some spinning objects. So one guy filmed it, and then a couple of weeks later, I think it was, they found that somebody else had filmed it as well, from the opposite direction. Same thing. You can see the sun is shining on the front of the other one, and the other one is from behind. It's not a plane, that's not a bird. What the hell can shoot out spheres like that? And instead, what we were talking about in the press is all these National Archive document releases. That was coming out at the same time this was doing the rounds. I don't think this has ever been shown on UK TV, to my knowledge. 2 people filmed it and they were like 2 or 4 miles apart. Same incident. That's a real event. That's obviously just a plane for comparison. I've had waves of sightings, as you know. These have happened at periodic times since the 47. Phoenix Lights is a big one. That's featured quite heavily in the Out of the Blue film. There have been films from Mexico, like the one you've just seen, Belgian Triangular Craft. There's loads of film, tons of it. Now, this is one that was shown to me by David Caton originally. Maslin Beach, Adelaide, Australia, 1993. Pictures by Eric Tonneson. We know the context. He made a full report. He's a World War II pilot, this guy. A very good observer. These were his pictures. And I'll just show you one. That's how good it is when it's zoomed in. The colours have been enhanced and that's all. The contrast is enhanced. Oh! That must be a fake. It's too clear, says the skeptic. But the skeptic also says there aren't any clear pictures of UFOs, flying saucers. So, what do you do? And again, I'm giving you an overview. You can read the details of that. David King kindly did a short interview with me. That information has come from Robert Hulse. He went to see the guy, went to see his family, got the full story. The guy was out taking pictures for a photographic contest, so we know why he was there.
What do you think of Billy Mayers?
I think he's had some type of experiences, but he was interfered with. I've mentioned that in the book in passing as well.
Sorry, just that last photo, because it was fake. Yeah, but, do you think that's us or them?
Not sure. It has some correspondence with what's known as the ARV, the Alien Reproduction Vehicle. Maybe it's some version of that. I really don't know. But again, read up on the Maslin Beach, which isn't, again, I don't know if there's any books being written about it. Maybe it's not long enough to write a book about. So the actual case, you know, you can describe it in about 4 pages, which I've done in my Finding the Secret Space Program book. I've got those pictures in there as well. For me, you can't consider these issues in isolation. You can't just look at UFOs. You can't just look at the Apollo hoax. You can't just look at 9/11. You have to see them all together. If you look at Nick Cook's book, for example, which is what kind of woke me up to some of this in year 2000, I wrote it a little bit after that, and I've corresponded with Nick Cook a couple of times as well. He points out that in the mid-50s, all the aerospace companies in the US, you know, Boeing, McDonnell, Martin, they all had some type of project to look into anti-gravity propulsion techniques and technologies. 1956, all stops. There's nothing in the public domain after 1956. And this may have been because they started Project Winterhaven, which was under the auspices of a chap called Thomas Townsend Brown, who was working on electrogravitics since the 1920s. But what happened in the year after, in other words 1957, what happened in 1957, everyone?
I was born.
Sputnik. So you clear off all the anti-gravity stuff and you go on to chemical rockets, which is all we've had in the mainstream ever since. Chemical rockets. Anything that's not chemical rockets as a form of propulsion will not work. Okay? The Apollo landings were a hoax. And any researcher that's looking at UFOs or anything like that, if they don't understand that, they are missing an important piece of the structure. Just to give you one example, I've got whole presentations on this, or 2 examples. That picture there was the first picture that was released, I think, in 2009. It's all in my books, in the Finding the Secret Space Program. That is meant to be Apollo 11 lunar module. That's a NASA picture, that, taken by a Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter in 2009. That is NASA's claim to be an Apollo artifact released in 2009. Now I say to you, if I'd taken that picture and said that's my picture of a flying saucer that's landed on the ground, which I took from a drone or from a light aircraft I was flying over, what would you think? You'd say to me, it's like a splodge to me, Andrew. Wouldn't you? That's what NASA claimed.
Andrew, do you think there's a connection between the moon landings and Freemasonry?
Yes, definitely.
As in keeping a secret?
Yes, yeah. Because all the astronauts are Freemasons. Yeah. And the Masonic symbolism, which is on some of the mission patches and stuff, yeah, definitely. This is one of the key pieces of evidence. This picture, I forget the number, I've got it in my other presentation. You can look this picture up. This is meant to be a picture of Charlie Duke's family from Apollo 17. I get the mission numbers mixed up. But I think this is Apollo 17. So Charlie Duke, he gets this picture, puts it in a plastic bag, and he puts it on the surface of the moon. The surface of the moon, the average temperature is 100 degrees centigrade. That's the average temperature. The temperature in daylight, full sun, 140 degrees. If you've ever left some photographs in the back of your car, you have to think back a few years, or a magazine perhaps, what happens to it if it's in your car? It curls up. It hasn't curled up. That was shot in a studio. That was shot in a studio. And there are other bits of evidence like that. If you want to watch a film called Moon Hoax Now by Jet Winsner, he points out, for example, that there's a sequence of events which proves that it was shot in a studio, because orange juice leaks out of the spacesuit and onto one of the cameras. That's documented in the Apollo Lunar Surface Journal. About a 10-minute section on that. Shot in a studio. Shot in a studio. And even now, you know, it's very important that you understand this. We're now 50 years on from the alleged first landing, and the last landing was in 1972. And we had Don Pettit saying that they destroyed the technology. He said that, I think. He's a NASA astronaut. He said that all the Apollo technology had been destroyed. They can't build it back. They were working on this Orion craft, and they had to get out one of the unused command module heat shields, which was stored at the Smithsonian Institution, and they had to give it to the current Orion project, because they didn't know how the heat shield had been built. You can read up on that if you want. And so we had, according to NASA, the last landing was in 72. They've had all these reboots. They've had various reboots. They've had the CXP, the Constellation program, which was started in 2004, and it was abandoned in 2015. They said they were going to have a man on the moon in 2020. The current program has no planned manned landing. And there is, at the moment, no US manned space program since the retirement of the space shuttle. Because so all the other stuff's going out of Baikonur Cosmodrome, former Soviet Union. So I recommend you read Towards the Moon Base. Has anything been learned from Apollo by Phil Coots? He's written 3 very good articles a year apart on the Orlis website. Is there a secret space program? Oh yes. This is Vandenberg Air Force Base. This is not NASA. Who knew that Vandenberg Air Force Base were launching space shuttles in the mid-80s? Do you know that? Yeah. There it is. There's a picture of it. It's on Wikipedia. Not that I recommend anybody looks at Wikipedia unless they can help it, because it censors information and distorts things. There you are. $5 billion launch facility that hardly anybody knew about. It wasn't exactly secret, but they didn't really broadcast it. And there were 2 other secret space programs which were only revealed after the event. One was called Manned Orbiting Laboratory, MOL, and ALMAS. That was the MOL was the US one, which was initiated under President Johnson in the 60s. Another criminal, by the way, and a crook. But that never flew. But the ALMAS program flew, and they had 5 missions, and they actually had a gun mounted on the underside of the craft, and that was explained in quite some detail in a PBS documentary called Astro Spies. I have got a clip, but I'm not going to play it, it's going to run out of time. But I've got this in my other presentation, Finding the Secret Space Program. Now, I interviewed Edgar Fouché. He got in touch with me by a sort of circuitous set of events. He came out in 1998, way before I knew him and way before I was getting back into this stuff. And he talked about secret military projects which were being run in the US. One of which was this thing here. This is sort of an artist's impression, called the TR-3B. He ended up writing this book called Alien Rapture: The Chosen, which was co-written with Brad Steiger, and he published that in '98. And he put it as a fictional novel, but what he says he did is he put a lot of the information that he'd been given in a fictionalised form, because he was advised that if he did that, he could write anything he wanted, because he says it's fiction, and they can't come after him for breaking his oaths. And there's some very detailed information in there. Again, I haven't really got time to play a clip of it, it's in my other program, but I'm pretty sure that Ed Fouché, I'm 99% sure that what he told me was true, everything was true. And he was talking about this thing called the TR-3B. It was at least 600 feet across. At least three of them, which cost $1 billion each, were flying by 1994, probably a lot earlier, because he saw them in the 70s, it would appear. And he said that they were flew because they were using a rotating field of plasma to generate a very powerful magnetic field with millions of Tesla in strength. And yes, you can indeed generate a strong magnetic field by rotating plasma. And he said, let's see, on the next slide, no it's not. The other thing that he said that was used in the TR-3B, he said it was used in the skin, was this substance which he'd overheard conversations and people had sent him stuff, and he said this in 1998. It used a material which was made out of quasi-crystals. Quasi-crystals. And I read this and I thought, you know, he's been watching too many Star Trek episodes. The quasi-crystals sounds like a load of rubbish to me. Well, you look up quasi-crystals and you'll find that in 2011 an Israeli scientist called Daniel Shechtman won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry for his work on quasi-crystals. And there's another presentation which I reference in the book where, what's his name? John, I'm trying to remember his name, so I haven't got it on the slide. There's a professor of physics at Imperial College London does a presentation. He talks about using quasi-crystals to create material with a negative refractive index. Now I don't expect any non-physicists to know what that means, but this is basically allows you to project an image into free space. That's like a hologram basically. Now you see, he put it as being theoretical, but coincidentally it used quasi-crystals, which was what Ed Fouché had said 14 years before the presentation that I saw was given. So, do we have any secret space program technology? Well, you might not be able to see this very well because of the light. Let me just see if I can switch that or the light off. I discovered this video by Peter Dunn. I put some music to it. It's only a couple of minutes long. And I think this could be, I'm not sure, but I think what you're seeing in this video is a space platform. This was a sequence of images from something called SOHO, which is the Solar and Heliospheric Observatory, which has been in operation since 1995. And you can see there's a stationary dot there whilst everything else is moving. And these are sort of called, that's a planet, I don't know which one. And you can recreate this video yourself using this website, helioviewer.org, which is an archive of all the images taken by the SOHO probe. I've got a whole chapter on the SOHO probe in my Finding the Secret Space Program book. No, sorry, the Secrets in the Solar System. It does zoom in a minute, so you'll be able to see it a bit more clearly. You can probably just see this little dot flashing. And it flashes in relation to what the coronal mass ejection is doing, which is this stream of particles which comes off the sun, which is what SOHO was meant to study. So these are all sort of flashes of cosmic rays that the sensor's picking up. But just here, you can see that every so often when the solar wind or the coronal mass ejection goes off, this thing lights up. So this object, whatever it is being affected by the coronal mass ejection coming off the sun. So I think that is, and I think why it's not moving very quickly is it's in a similar orbit to the SOHO probe. The SOHO probe is in one of the Lagrange points, which is 1 million miles from the Earth. It's where there's equal force of gravity between the Earth and the Sun. That's where SOHO is. And I think this space platform is somewhere near there. And I was told by a chap called Frank Ferguson that his father in the 1950s was working on space platforms. These are way out in the solar system, not just ones around the Earth. And I think that is what is revealed in this video. But I could be wrong. definitely not a star or a planet because it doesn't match any of the orbits, and the stars don't move in relation to where those images were taken. So I think that is probably my best guess, is that Soho has actually picked up a bit of space hardware, which is cloaked. You can't normally see it. So I've called this evidence of intelligent activities in the solar system, and that's the subject of this book, Secrets in the Solar System. And there's lots of anomalies on pictures that have come from the rest of the solar system, particularly from Mars. And this is one of the key ones, which was revealed by David Percy on the Orlis website. And I really found this a bit, sort of blew my mind when I saw this, really. Because what this image, it's the grey sort of coloured image, this is an image from Viking, the Viking probe from the 1970s, which cost $1 billion even then. And this thing is called the Tholus, and this is just called, I forget what this thing's called. And I think that's called the Citadel there. But does anyone know what this place, well, it says on there, it's Avebury, why am I asking you? So this is Avebury, that's the stone circle at Avebury, and that's Silbury Hill. How come we've got this analogue at a scale of 14:1 on Mars at Avebury? And I made that picture myself from the two images, and this is sort of overlaid on a map. And there's at least three features which correspond to each other. How's that? Coincidence? Is it really a coincidence? Well, you can read my book and consider it. This was discovered in a picture, I think, I forget the year this was taken. This is from Mars Global Surveyor. Do you ever get natural structures that look like a T and have two rectangles like that? This is meant to be a natural structure on Mars. It's really natural. It's 3 miles long. That is 3 miles long. And here's some more images from Mars Global Surveyor. I've got some better ones since, which is why I've updated the cover. To me, when I saw this is one of the most extraordinary images taken anywhere in the solar system. And when I asked people to explain to me what that was, I wrote to some geologists. They couldn't explain it. They wouldn't explain it, in fact. That's about a mile away from it. This looks like a glass dome of some kind. And yet what we're getting, we've had another story in The Guardian fairly recently that they discovered methane on Mars. But then a few years ago they said that there wasn't a discovery of methane on Mars. If you read my book, you'll see that they've been saying that they've discovered water on Mars and they've discovered evidence of life on Mars. They've been saying that for 40 years, since the Viking probe. They've been saying the same thing for 40 years. You've never seen these pictures in the press. These are from NASA's website. Well, they're from Mailing Space Science Systems website, which is NASA's contractor for these images. There's a whole story behind that as well. But there's a whole lot more in the Secrets in the Solar System book about all this stuff. And not just this, there's other stuff as well. So what they're basically doing is limited hangout. They're saying, oh yeah, we've got these probes going around Mars, so there may be sort of evidence of something, but it's probably no more than a bit of methane and a bit of water. And that's all you're getting, folks. But I tend to go along with the idea that there was a civilization on Mars. It was destroyed, or largely destroyed, and it may have come here. It's had some dealings with what's gone on here, and there's been some, transfer of civilizations of sorts. Because as you may or may not know, if you put normal people into an environment where they don't know what time it is, take away the normal stimulus of night and day, but you give them, sufficient entertainment, get them to read books or whatever, they will revert to a 25-hour day, not a 24-hour day. And the length of the day on Mars is 24.9 hours. And that's on the cover of my book. That was what they had on the high-rise website for this image, for that number, 0072302170. They had that like that for a few years, and then they changed it to that. So when I went to look at it one time to show it to someone else by about 2011, they changed it to this. But you can still access that image, you just have to go down to the links and find it. Why would you take off one of the most arresting images that's ever come back from a space program? from a space program. Iapetus, this was a good presentation done by Richard Hoagland back in 2004, so that's 15 years ago now. This is a moon of Saturn, discovered in the 1700s by Cassini, and it was always known that it was very unusual because it had a light side and a dark side. Some people call it the yin-yang moon. And then they discovered this in 2004. An 800-mile long wall on the surface, which bisects the light and dark half. And it's 12 miles high. And it has hexagonal craters like this one, and a straight line ridge within this oddly shaped crater, which is 24 miles long if you measure it from the image information. It's all public, but you don't hear about this. Yeah, well, I'll leave Phobos. Very interesting stuff about Phobos as well. So, yeah. So while now I'm going to do the teaching aid bit. I'm going to pass these around now. Start at the front. You can have one each and just swap them over. Just pass that to the person next to you while I'm talking. And these are just, don't be squeamish, they're just plastic, they're not, real or anything. So, what do we know about alien races, alien beings? Maybe we don't know anything. I tend to disagree with that view. I think we do know some things. Typically, what you'll hear lots of different names bandied about. Pleiadians, Pleiadians, which is Billy May, which Maureen mentioned earlier on. The Orionids, the Orions, Craig Mutchell mentioned those, but Craig Mutchell himself, I mean, again, Richard and I have talked about him. He seems to be injecting disinformation. I don't have time to go into that now. The Andromedans, which are talked about by Alex Collier. That's a very interesting presentation that he did back in 1994. And he predicted that something will crack off after August 2001. So there's going to be some big event after August 2001. That's what Alex Collier said in 1994. Was it just a lucky guess? He said there was some deadline being set by August 2001. And that was 7 years after his presentation, this interview he gave. You hear about the Zeta Reticulans. I mentioned a little bit about those in the book. Betty and Barney Hill talked about those, and they've come up again recently with the Bob Lazar case. Not sure about that. I'm not sure quite what to think about the Zeta Reticulans. Galactic Federation of Light, that came up a few years ago. Sheldon Nidal, Blossom Goodchild and others. And you hear, obviously, the most common one that you hear about is the Greys. You hear about the Reptilians, you hear about the Anunnaki, which is Zecharia Sitchin was sort of popularised that. And I've written about Zecharia Sitchin's book in the Acknowledged book. Zecharia Sitchin, again, is an Israeli, said to be a 33rd degree Mason. Various sort of facts about him which you perhaps need to be a bit cautious about. I've written all that up in my book. I think Sitchin, the story about the Anunnaki having fiery rockets, that's clearly rubbish. Why would aliens have rockets? We don't have any evidence of that from the witness accounts. Did they interfere with human genetics? Well, I think that's the bit that might be true. Have we got any pictures of aliens? People say there aren't any pictures of aliens. Really? Are you sure about that? So, these are 3 pictures. I've got 1 or 2 more in the book. Not very well known, although Tim Good's written about this case, which I only read up on that fairly recently. Filiberto Capone's 1993 Close Encounters, 9th of May that was. He was a sculptor and a ceramicist. And he'd come back from riding his motorbike in Abruzzi, Italy. He saw this sort of thing on the ground which seemed to be getting out some type of wrapper, and then this was one of the pictures he took. There's a sequence of 4 images. And if you look at these images and you look at the story behind them, he said that his grandmother witnessed this being on the 3rd occasions. The strange thing is that this thing was sighted on a number of different days. It came back to see him, so you can find it a bit difficult to believe. But look into that story, and I tend to think that these pictures are real.
Odd things happen to the photographs as well. Like,
yeah, I think they disappear for a time or something. Yeah. Same with the Maslin Beach pictures. They were taken away, and somebody had copies of them. Fortunately, I think the negatives disappeared. The Alien Interview in 1997, very interesting video. Nobody's sort of classed that as an outright hoax. They've said, oh, it's a Hollywood dummy. But again, look at the alien interview. Very, very interesting video, and the idea of the aliens being telepathic and the military communicating through military telepaths, that comes out. This picture here, there's a story behind this which was told by Bill Cooper. You saw it earlier on. Bill Cooper to me is pretty reliable. Most of the stuff that he's come out with I think is correct. Bill Cooper, who did the thing about the E.T. film that I showed you earlier, he predicted that Osama bin Laden would be blamed for something. He predicted that in June 2001. He predicted that they were going to blame something on Osama bin Laden, and then 3 months later 9/11 happened, and then 2 months after 9/11 Bill Cooper was dead. He was shot outside his house. So I think Bill Cooper was a genuine guy. He had a lot of stuff that was correct, and he wasn't afraid to correct himself. And he said that he tried to find out about this image and he didn't get any straight answers. So this could be a real image of an alien from an Amoco advertising campaign. You can read up on the story of that, the Amoco alien. Another really interesting website that I came across a good few years ago now is Wingmakers. When I spoke to Lloyd Pye about this was years ago, he thought it was some type of elaborate marketing hoax. But it's a very, very interesting site, and it talks about the grand portal of consciousness, where this group called the Wingmakers are part of the central race, whoever they are, and they're trying to help human consciousness evolve. And they're doing this through music and art and mythology, and they've set up this sort of mythological set of revelations. And it's very interesting. I haven't read all of the material, but I think there's something in this.
Andrew, is that the Lloyd Pye?
Yes, that's the Starchild skull, which I'm going to talk about. Yeah, I'll tell you about that in a few minutes. Have aliens been involved in our history? Well, I think the answer to that is yes. Some of that's come out in Sitchin's books, in Michael Tellinger's books. One of the things that Lloyd told me about, I can't remember if it's in his book, I put it in my book though, is the Aquatic Ape Theory. In that there's been an aquatic phase in human development. And part of the reason for saying that is things like we have subcutaneous fat. Chimpanzees don't have subcutaneous fat. The way that our voice box works, it's not like chimpanzees and gorillas. It's more like what dolphins have. And I've put a whole list of things in there. And also, if you look at how close we are to pigs, which are not chimpanzees. People use pig valves in their hearts, don't they, and stuff. Pigs are genetically very close to us, and they're very intelligent. And there's a similar set of evidence which compares pigs and humans, and compares chimpanzees and humans, and compares dolphins and humans. And there's a lot more similarity between, or probably as much, if not more similarity between pigs and humans than there is between chimpanzees and humans. So this is not a clear-cut case. Lloyd Pye thinks, and I tend to agree with him, that we were created, as a Homo sapiens was created from other species by genetic engineering. And that, if you look at where I think Sitchin is, valuable, is in the exploration of the Babylonian myths, mainly in Numa Elish and the Epic of Gilgamesh. I went back and I read the original translations, that you can get them online easily enough. And there's some very interesting stuff that comes up from those two. Those are just ancient scriptures, nothing to do with aliens. You can just get them and read them.
We have a local monument called the Thubalandia, which is a woman lying on her side with two view platforms that happen to be eggs. She's
really?
giving birth, and I think it's Ishtar from this situation. And the royals know the truth, and also the Angel of the North is also a Babylonian figure that connected.
Oh, is it?
It says so on top. It says the distance to the Angel of the North, and the distance to Stephen Delville.
Very interesting. I didn't know that. Yes, this goes back to the Babylonian creation myths. That's what these are. So again, you can go and read the English translations. I read two different ones, and I go into that in the Acknowledged book. So yeah, I sort of got a bit ahead of myself slightly because I was hoping to get onto this. But you've seen this skull now. The story of this: it was found in a cave in 1930 by a young teenage girl. It eventually ended up in the hands of Melanie Young. I've got a clip of that here, and is it even from Earth? Found in this area of Mexico, 100 miles southwest of Chihuahua, in a cave, dated to be 900 years old, and I've just got a clip from UFO Hunters from 2009. I think, have I got it here? Or maybe I haven't. But this is Melanie Young, who owns the skull, but fortunately it's become a very sad story, really, of what's happened, and I've written that up in the Acknowledged book. So, 2 skulls were discovered in this cave by this young girl, a human skull and the so-called Starchild skull, and it was carbon dated, 900 years old, plus or minus 40 years. It was carbon dated twice, as were both skulls. Melanie Young in 1999 passed it over to Lloyd Pye, who'd done a lot of work looking at Bigfoot, hominoids, Sasquatch. He knew a lot about the morphology of things like the Miocene apes and all the precursor humans and the pre-humans and the hominids. And so when he saw the Starchild skull, he knew it was very weird. Melanie Young worked with as a neonatal nurse, so she worked with neonates with newborns, and she knew from the shape of the skull it wasn't hydrocephaly, or so she said back in 1999. So there's a sort of human on the top, Starchild on the bottom. There's 25 major physical differences between the human skull and the Starchild skull. The Starchild has no brow ridges. The bones are reconfigured. The zygomatic arches are different. The eye sockets are only ½ an inch deep. The ear canal is in a different place relative to humans. It has this crease or this dent, which you might have noticed when you were handling it. And that proves it's not hydrocephalic, despite what it says on Wikipedia and similar sites, which declares it as a human deformed skull. It's not deformed, perfectly symmetric. What you handled was a plastic replica, but it's made from the real skull. With X-rays, you will see that this skull wasn't cradle boarded. You can see that this human skull that was found with it was cradle boarded, a very straight line there. And this has got convolutions and things and lumps and bumps. It has no inion. One of the only skulls not to have an inion bone. All human skulls have an inion bone. It sort of sticks out the back of your skull. You can feel it. Everyone has an inion. It's not a skull of a hydrocephalic, which is say they always try and say this because that's what a hydrocephalic's child looks like. And you have this creased dent, and these bones are fused. They don't fuse, certainly not as well as this fuses, in something that develops hydrocephaly. And these bones are fused, as you can see. And there's the comparative X-ray between the human skull and the Starchild. You can see there's no similarity, other than it's got 2 eye sockets. This sort of cauliflower type appearance here, those are the human sinuses. The Starchild skull doesn't have any sinuses, which is extremely rare. When Lloyd first heard about that, he thought that that was proof that this was an alien, because but there are some humans that are born without sinuses, but it's very rare. It's very rare. And they try to say it's a progeria victim, it's hydrocephaly, it's what's the other one? I can't remember. There's a couple of other syndromes where you get a deformed bone structure. They try to say it's that. And you see these sort of eye sockets are totally different, the way that the bone structure is there. And the other problem for the skeptics with this particular skull, and this is the real skull in the picture here because these were bone samples that were taken for DNA tests. That's a human skull with 9mm thickness bone. This is a Starchild, 3mm thick. Yet it is much stronger than human bone. They had to use a Dremel blade. So if you get human bone which you want to dissolve for DNA testing, put it in a test tube and it dissolves in 24 hours, that's fine, that's what normally happens. You get the bone from that other skull, it doesn't dissolve in a week. That ain't no human bone. Not even close. Chemical composition is different. It's more like collagen. The Starchild skull's bone has been tested, I think more than once, and it's more like tooth enamel. It's not like human bone. DNA tests were done between the period of 1999 and 2012, and basically there was sort of conflicting information. You read conflicting information online, but the latest tests that were done in 2010, the earlier tests were done with primers, and they couldn't recover the Starchild's DNA, nuclear DNA. There's two types of DNA. There's mitochondrial and nuclear. The early tests couldn't recover the Starchild's nuclear DNA, but they also did the test on the human skull that was found with it, which was the same age, and they recovered human DNA by the same technique using the same primers back in 2003. They couldn't recover the Starchild's DNA, which meant almost certainly it wasn't human. A further test was done in 2012 with different techniques, using a technique called shotgunning, I think is the correct technique. And over a period of about 2 years, it was found that by statistical projections they didn't recover all of the DNA, but the Starchild's FOXP2 gene was found, and in the whole of the human population you can only have a difference of 2 sequences within the human FOXP2 gene for the whole of the human population, and each of those 2 differences cause genetic problems. One means that you can't speak, and the other is fatal. By statistical projections, they worked out, for example, that well, what they discovered was the Starchild's FOXP2 gene had 56 differences to the human. 56. So Starchild's DNA, I think, was about 50% the same as human DNA, whereas chimp's DNA is 98% the same as ours. But the Starchild, statistically, they didn't recover all of it. By the best measurements they had, it was 50% the same as humans. So the geneticist who did this, who's remained anonymous by the way, the probability, he said, the probability that a highly specific arrangement of changes in a small fragment could have occurred by accumulation of sequencing errors is extremely low, if not close to 0. Nor could this arrangement have occurred due to contamination with the DNA of any known species. From this evidence, one may conclude that the underlying biochemistry of the entity's life form must be either the same as or highly similar to humans or other species. Yet, the use of the genetic code, which still remains universal, is distinctively different, implying that this life form is very likely the result of a markedly variant and non-intersecting evolutionary process. Conclusion, it's not from around here, not from this planet.
How did you come into possession of the skull?
Well, a friend who got it from a friend who was the original owner of it gave it to me due to my expertise in neonatal nursing and anatomy. When I saw it and told them that this is totally out of this world, they were like, take it, don't bring it back.
If it were a hydrocephalic, this would be bulged out, okay? But only one side would be bulged out, or the back would be bulged. It wouldn't be symmetrical like that is.
So a hydrocephalic skull is asymmetrical.
It's asymmetrical.
And this skull is symmetrical.
It's completely symmetrical. If that were a hydrocephalic, the bones would not be connected. There would be no skull.
What other explanation do you have for this skull?
I don't have one. I can't find one.
People have been seeing aliens for thousands of years, but there's never been a single piece of hard evidence. Now it's possible the Starchild skull is just that.
We are here today with Lloyd Pye, who has worked as a military intelligence
This bit's slightly out of date because it's
more than 30
before the
years
2012 tests came out.
He's a primary expert on the Starchild skull, having researched it for more than a decade.
Why all this interest in it? I believe that it stands a very good chance of being the smoking gun that everybody is looking for, the holy grail of the field of UFO alien research.
Could you walk us through the main differences between the Starchild skull and a normal human skull?
The eye sockets of a normal human are about 2 inches. Starchild's not even 1. There are no sinuses in here, no upper sinuses at all. And you turn them around, you notice that the chewing muscles that come up through here and spread out to attach your jaw and chew cover quite a wide area here. With the Starchild, it's much reduced, so we have a much smaller, much reduced lower face. And there are fibers woven through the matrix of the bone, which were found under a scanning electron microscope.
Does this skull have any fibers at all?
No skull of any kind of primate that we know of, or any really bone that we know of, has those kind of fibers. They seem to be unique to the Starchild. If you turn around and look on the inside and you feel in here, you feel that ridging of bone that will hold the cerebellum in place. With the Starchild, because it has such expanded brain pressing down that way at such a steep angle, we should have a spreading of the foramen magnum, but we don't. So we have a very different kind of brain in this skull, whatever it is. Now, if you stick your finger in the foramen magnum hole to simulate a neck, right, you see how the human is there, so it would be like this, but the Starchild's actually balanced like this. So it's kind of like a misshapen golf ball on a tee. It's very different from the human neck in that it's half the size and it's centered up under the head.
When you see how the neck connects to the skull, that's a closure for me. It's not a deformity. It was built that way.
We've had the DNA of the human tested, fully recovered, no problem, normal human being. But in 203 we found that the DNA of the Starchild was very different. While we could recover its mitochondrial DNA, which comes from its mother, the nuclear DNA which contains the DNA of its mother and its father, we could not recover that, which indicates that there's something very unusual, if not completely different, about the father.
To your knowledge, is there any reason why the nuclear DNA was not recoverable other than the fact that it's not a human father?
If the father had been human, all indications are it should have pulled up very easily with the primers that were used, but it didn't, so we can only conclude that there's something very unusual about the father.
I'm really excited to meet with David Aguilar because David Aguilar has written a number of books for National Geographic on what's going on out there in the solar system and what other life forms may look like.
We are talking to NASA, we're talking to the Origins of Life Initiative here at Harvard. We're actively searching for life in the universe.
This really elevates our investigation to have a Harvard scientist weigh in and talk to us about the real possibilities of alien life coming into contact with Earth.
What shapes, what forms, what evolutionary pattern they might take, boy, that's the big mystery today. But of course things are going to evolve differently on another planet. And there's no reason that we would have humanoids. I mean, the chance of finding humanoids that look like us, like you see in Star Trek, are so unbelievably small. You're going to get intelligent creatures, but they may not look anything like we would even relate to an intelligence. There's no telling what could be possible, but since we don't have anything in our hands to look at and compare, I mean, I'd love to bring one of these guys into a real lab and have everybody take a look at it.
David, you just said that there's no evidence of extraterrestrial life right now. We think we may have something here.
Wait a minute. Guys, what am I looking at?
This skull was found in a cave in northern Mexico. It was carbon dated to 900 years ago. Look at the eye sockets. Look at the shape of the head. And look at the neck.
I'm curious, any DNA samples from this?
The mitochondrial DNA is human. They did the nuclear DNA test and could not sequence the father's DNA from the nucleus of the cell.
Are you saying this was a cross with an alien or just a human with a terrible deformity?
That's one theory. It's a hybrid.
Prove it.
So, they take it to the Harvard guy. He says he wants to get one of these guys into the laboratory, and he says to them, prove it. He doesn't say, can I take this skull into my laboratory? Because he knows what it represents. This is why you won't get any disclosure. In other words, you have to look at this information for yourself and do it for yourself. Now, that research has now been run into the ground by none other than Melanie Young, who's the owner of the skull, and Mel Fabregas. They have now declared, collectively, I'm summarising it massively, that is a human skull with hydrocephaly. That was done a couple of years ago, about 4 years after Lloyd Pye died. And I've written that up in my book. They did a new investigation with this woman who has connections to the US military, and she declared that the old investigation needed to be thrown out, and her investigation says that it's a human skull. And I've written that up in my book and on my website if you want to go into all the gory details. We're getting short of time, I haven't really got onto the... and Melanie Young now says it's a hydrocephalic skull, despite what she said in that first part of that clip I just showed you. So yeah, that, as far as I'm concerned, you've looked at the replica of the skull of an alien being. You know, that's all I can tell you really. Everything that I've seen about that skull says that it's not from around here. You get Lloyd Pye's book, which covers some of that. There's another book by him, but it only goes up to 2007. I'm only going to get a bit of time now because I'm getting up to time. Probably will take some questions. I'm probably going to skip through these very quickly. So I've got some other stuff I want to show you. Again, it's quite a complex issue. I've got more information in the book. These things were originally seen starting in the 1600s, was one of the earliest reports, 1686. You got this comes up quite frequently. You start to look at the history. 1678, you have this Moyne Devil, the crop formations. 1880, we've got a report, and some of these are written up in Nature.
Don't worry about going over 10 because we'll start something out.
Okay, all right. Well, I'll do a bit more on this then. So this was quite a famous case. I did a little bit more investigation into this more recently. This Tolly saucer nest, where this is actually in a like swampy area. These are like reeds. I thought it was just grass, but it's actually a lagoon with reeds growing in it. And the farmer actually saw a saucer land there, and then it sort of went away, and this pattern was left. So this is where there's been this connection between flying saucers and crop circles. Although it's one of the few where this has actually been seen. There aren't many where they've seen actually objects flattening out the crops. It appears to be something else, but you can look into that. Developed in the 70s. Colin Andrews started to do research in the late 70s, early 80s. He became very famous, and he found out that you could distinguish certain types of crop formations because by then the outright hoaxing had started. And you had, that's a picture I actually took in 1987. My brother used to live in Wiltshire at that time. He's moved to South France now. But this was a picture I took from, it was near Silbury Hill. I can't remember the exact location. But there you see a simple ring with 4 satellite rings. Then got more complex in the 1990s. You had these pictograms. A version of this was famously used on the cover of one of the Led Zeppelin albums. I forget the title of it. There's a bit of a story behind that apparently. And then you got some enormous formations like this one, which was at Milk Hill, 14th of August 2001, with like 200 circles, and you're thinking, somebody with planks and string did that, really? Really? And I actually did a bit of counting. I used some websites and I generated some crop circle counts, put them into an Excel spreadsheet. I did this a couple of years ago, so it goes up to 2016. And putting those onto a graph, you actually see, I was surprised because they peaked in the early 90s, 1991, and then most sources show that there was a steady sort of decline in the numbers, and that decline really sort of was going on right until the present day from the counts that I looked at. And some of the counts showed a sharp decline in a bit before 2001. Let's see, yeah, and then so they've tried to explain crop formations in various ways. One way is that they claim there's an interaction with the solar wind, and you get like a plasma cloud in the sky, and then you get the solar wind coming in, and the charge builds up, and it forms a vortex, and you get these balls of light, which are commonly seen around crop formations, and then that ends up creating a formation on the ground. But I don't buy it. Not if you consider the Milk Hill formation, and particularly one or two I'll show you in a minute. And you get burn marks in the stems. This has been observed at a number of sites. BLT Research, that's the website where you get a lot of this information. But this is from another study that was done in 1991, and this is somewhere near where I live. This was in Mansfield in Nottinghamshire. These stems were taken from, and some crop circles were found there. And there are effects measured on the plants as well, where they'll take plants out of the circle, and they'll take plants that are not in the formation, and they'll germinate them, or let them germinate, or let them grow the next year, and they grow to different lengths. So there's some energy involved here. There's some sort of energy which has affected the plants and the growth of the seeds. And I just want to try and get some of this in. I realise I'm going through this very quickly. And there are separate presentations on this on YouTube that I've done where I cover this in bit more depth, some of it. But this circle from 1999 was particularly interesting because they managed to get soil samples from this circle from underneath the formation. And what they found was these. In the soil samples they found these iron microspheres, which were about 10 to 40 microns in diameter, and they were magnetised, they were stuck together. This is from the soils underneath where the crop formation was. This is a very important finding. Now again, you'll see this name, W.C. Levengood, you may not be able to read it, so it's quite small text. He gets a lot of flack saying that he was a PhD and blah 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 blah. I've put some of that in my book, and I don't really worry too much about that. These are his pictures, these are what they show. Another scientist called Robert C. Reynolds, he basically said that the soils showed the effects of being heated to between 600 and 800 degrees centigrade. Yet the crop that was on the top wasn't burned. That would have basically set the crop on fire, and it would have been charred and burned if it really had. So the soil was showing the heating, the crop formation wasn't. Crop formations have happened where there is a big chalk aquifer in Wiltshire. It's the biggest chalk aquifer in Europe. So has that got something to do with it? Well, I think it has, because I think there's some interaction between energy. And energy can be affected by the flow of water. That energy can be affected by the flow of water. I mentioned that in the book. And there's an experiment which was done by Lord Kelvin showing that water droplets can create an electric discharge. Kelvin spark gap generator. So just to I've skipped over a lot of things, but the crops, interesting crop circles grew from the mid-1980s to about 1990 over a period of 10 years. And Colin Andrews did something called Operation Blackboard in 1990, employing the UK military. It's all on his website. A year after that, 1991, was when this big Doug and Dave story came out, and they said that they'd hoaxed all these formations with a plank and some string and and whatnot, and they went and made some formations in a field. They claimed that they'd faked all these circles. And the Circle Makers group, which you should go and look at, that was investigated by Richard D. Hall in 2009. That group, the Circle Makers group, has apparent connections to MI5. Why would MI5 be interested in hoaxing crop circles, do you think? This is from their website. This is one of the... They didn't hoax this exactly. They did this as for part of the album cover for the Levelers, I think this one was. So they were paid to make this, with agreement from whoever. So yeah, it looks like some of the other formations, true enough. But again, if you look at how crop formations might be made, this is where we start to get onto microwaves again. Is some sort of microwave beam being used from a platform and shone down into the fields to make these formations? Well, again, going back to Operation Blackbird, it was the year after this that they just basically shut down the whole crop circle phenomenon. They did a Channel 5 documentary, they had the Doug and Dave article in the press, and they basically said it was all Doug and Dave doing it. They shut it down. And it happened just, as I say, the year after the military got involved, and Colin Andrews was getting the attention of government involved.
From Wiltshire, Clarence Mitchell. They watched and waited all
Clarence
night,
Mitchell.
but without
He did this
success. The monitors of
He's the
Operation
guy that's the
Blackbird
spokesperson
no
from
nearer
Magnum
to
Camp.
solving the mystery of the crop circles.
This is him in 1990.
As dawn arrived over Wiltshire, it was clear the circles had chosen not to appear in front of the specialised cameras and microphones. Last night, optimism was high. The fields being watched had a history of circles appearing in previous years. The observers were briefed to watch for any sign of a circle's arrival, from amber lights in the sky to electronic noises.
We're very confident we're in the right place. This is the certainly the most active area anywhere in the world. That's been well established since 1980.
The latest circles to appear just a few miles away are the most spectacular yet. Theories on what causes them include alien messages delivered by spacecraft, rapidly swirling winds, or elaborate hoaxes. The men behind Operation Blackbird are convinced the circles show some degree of intelligence in their formation. They don't believe them to be hoaxes. The observers are undaunted at their lack of success on their first night. They've still got 3 weeks of watching to go. They're confident they will be the first people to solve the mystery by witnessing and recording a circle actually being made.
The mystery of the circles, more from Wiltshire Lee.
So again, you can read into that on Colin Andrews' website. And he's a funny character, Colin Andrews. I'll say a bit more about him shortly. This again, leads you to understand there's something else going on. If people are stomping boards on the field, is it really going to have these residual effects in the soil so that the next year you can see the pattern from the previous year in the ground? Really? Maybe if there's enough pressure, but I think it's highly unlikely. I think this is an energy imprint. You got talk of Mayan symbolism. This is going back to 2009. They were building up to 2012. A lot of these formations were about Mayan, the Mayan calendar and the Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent. But I don't buy all of that, at least not in that way. And then in 2010, I started asking the question: why were we getting all these symbols to do with Mayan symbolism? These crop circle formations, I should say. And why didn't we have any with Christian symbolism in it? And lo and behold, just after it was actually just before I asked myself this question at presentation, there was this image of what appears to be an image of the Turin shroud of the face of Jesus, or what's alleged to be Jesus, next to the M4. So that was one of the images which actually has Christian symbolism built into it. Now, just again, very quick trip through this is all in the book, which you can download for free. We got this message in 2001, and they even had to put a message on the SETI website, the NASA SETI website, and they were claiming that this couldn't possibly be a message from aliens, but it's very peculiar. This was the formation that you saw in the previous picture, and what it was based on was this Arecibo message, which was a binary bitmap message which was sent out in 1974 with various sort of facts and figures about the Earth and human beings encoded into this sort of graphic here. And then the crop formation was a version of this where certain things were changed. And this thing here was actually also shown in a circle, or a formation I should say, in year 2000. It was repeated. So this was very, very intricate, and it had a specific message in it. So who thought of doing that? Is this hoaxes? And then this one that's on the cover of my book. Now with this one, basically, they said this must be a hoax. This must be a hoax because it's far too intricate. But when you actually look at that, that is a message, and it's written in ASCII, which is the American Standard Code for Information Interchange. It might give us a clue as to who really wrote it, perhaps. And the message, if you read it as a binary coded message, which is explained in this posting by Paul Vigay, I met Paul Vigay in 2006, it says there were two versions that were published, one of which was slightly incorrect. The incorrect version was published on Linda Moulton Howe's website. Beware the bearers of false gifts and their broken promises. Much pain but still time. Believe, full stop. There is good out there. We oppose deception. Conduit closing, comma. That was the message that was encoded into that formation. So if you work that out, that is actually 1,000 bits of information. So if you go back to that picture, there are 1,134, if I remember correctly, zeros and ones encoded into just that formation. You imagine doing that with stamping on it and plank or wood. In other words, mechanically producing. Do you think somebody could do it? Do you think somebody could do it? I don't think so. Anybody could do that.
Andrew, Paul Vigay was found dead mysteriously, wasn't he?
Correct. It's in my book, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
He committed suicide. Well, he allegedly committed suicide. So he is quite an interesting chap. Now, I corresponded, you see there this name Osborne, Maurice Osborne, he also decoded this message correctly, as did Paul Vigay. Now I wrote to Maurice Osborne fairly recently because he actually reproduced his own crop formation like this in 2004 to send his message back. We welcome all who respect our free will. If you choose to help, then help us to help ourselves. There is good here too. We look for a reply. That's what he encoded by the same method, and you can see that's his circle that he made. He got permission from the farmer to do it. And I asked him, I said, how long did it take to make that? It took 2 full days of hard work in daylight to make our reply crop circle with a message. I think it was held by 3 or 4 people. So that gives you an idea of how long that formation must have taken. And that hasn't got the alien head and all that other stuff that's in it. So have we seen any instances of encoded messages using ASCII or binary or anything similar in anywhere else that's been presented to us? Yes, we have. Operation Blackjack was published as a kind of cartoon series, and it was about a possible terrorist nuclear attack on London. And it was like a sequence of slides, like a comic strip, an adult comic strip. And on a couple of the slides, they had this. You see here, it says Union of North America, and this face and a barcode. And they had this number. This was just on one of the slides, and it's still on the Internet Archive. This was on the UK Daily Telegraph website. Okay, so you take that sequence of numbers, and I checked this myself. It turns out that that is hexadecimal code. If you know what hexadecimal code, it's used in computing and programming. And if you put that into a hex to ASCII converter, the message that comes out is, this is not simply entertainment. That was an encoded message which was put in the Daily Telegraph in 2012. And there was another part of that as well that's in my book, and you can find various forum postings about it. So, I'm going to try and finish off quickly now. I showed you the iron microspheres because in 2008, 9, maybe it was 2010, Stephen E. Jones, who was a physics professor who worked at, one time, Los Alamos National Laboratories, produced this paper about the destruction of the World Trade Center. And he said that they'd found dust from the World Trade Center, they'd analysed it, and it had iron-rich microspheres in it of about 20 micrometers in diameter, which is exactly the same sort of thing that was found in Levengood's crop circle samples. And then the same spheres were found in soil near the Hesdalen lights that was recovered from an apparition of the Hesdalen lights when they found some strange residue on a rock, and they found it had iron microspheres in it. The Hesdalen lights appears to be an energy phenomenon of some kind. That's been going on for 30, 40 years. You can read about that separately. This is a very short clip of about a minute. This was filmed at Hesdalen. It's in Norway. So what are these orbs that just suddenly appeared and then split up? Been filmed multiple times in Hesdalen Valley. And that was a spectrogram they did of that. I think somebody took some long exposure photographs. That's what they got from the spectrogram. Freddie Silver was levitated when he was sitting in a crop circle. Levitation was also experienced by people during the events of the destruction of the World Trade Center. And I'd made a table, all these effects which relate to both crop formations and the destruction of the World Trade Center. David Caton and Robert Hulse, they investigated and found these anomalous energy readings from a Geiger counter, Geiger Muller tube. There's a video that Robert Hulse sent me about that. And they did this investigation in this formation which was 2006, I think. I've got the date somewhere, I can't remember the date. The Pusey Nautilus. So you've got this main formation here, and then you've got this little formation here. And Richard Hall told me about this. I haven't got time to play the video clip. So what I wanted to show you is, right, yes. So this is the Pusey Nautilus with this trampled down, but originally it wasn't trampled down. And David Caton said this in the interview. Before it got trampled down, that's what was in this little side area, which is actually a very small version of the main circle. Anyone heard of a zoom facility on some type of equipment which draws a pattern? A projector that draws a pattern? That's the full version, that's a zoomed out version, a very much smaller version.
Like a pantograph thing.
Pantograph type effect, whatever you want to call it. So I think that a lot of the crop circles will be produced by technology. Technology probably owned by Black Ops military, which is what Jacques Vallée said. And I think what they were doing between the 2007 to 2009, they were injecting false information through crop circles into the New Age movement. All this Mayan 2012 awakening of human consciousness didn't happen really, or at least not to my way of thinking. We didn't all ascend into these spiritual beings and spiritual realms. Didn't happen. So yeah, we now know what happened to the World Trade Center. This was done with technology. It has similarities to what we've seen in crop circles. And the UFO researchers have actually tried to cover some of this up. I'll just mention that briefly before we finish. This was taken, this toasted car parking lot. You saw this on the first slide. These cars were turned into rusting hulks on the day, yet some of the cars were okay. There is no other way that this was possible other than that being this was some type of energy which was in use. And this was about a quarter of a mile from the World Trade Center itself. So, and the dust cloud actually came through this parking lot. So it appears the cloud was energized in some way. And here's the upside down car, upside down fire truck, upside down car, upside down police car. Cars were levitated. Researchers won't talk about that, let alone the mainstream. We'll skip over. And it's to do with the Hutchison effect. I haven't got time to go through all of this, as I say, I was skipping over it. But I just wanted to mention that you need to look into Hurricane Erin as well, which was part of the events of 9/11. Science Applications International Corporation, they actually helped out. They're a big black budget military contractor. They helped out with the production of the NIST reports about the destruction of the World Trade Center. They also go under the name of Leidos. They changed their name in 2013, or they split off as an offshoot company. And they're members of the Directed Energy Professional Society as well. They were sued by Dr. Judy Wood. They were mentioned by William Porlek, and they were also mentioned, the book was mentioned by Paul Hellyer. He's one of the good guys. He's actually tried to disclose some of this information within the UFO research community. Nobody else will talk about it.
One additional person in Ottawa who would know is the...
Again, I've got too many clips here to play, really. But Greer, Stephen Greer, will not talk about 9/11. I've got a whole chapter on Greer in my latest book. Greer went and lived in Israel for 3 years. He had an abusive childhood. He says that in his own book. He talks about powers that be having advanced technology, but he will not talk about 9/11 and what happened. He started various free energy initiatives. This is going back to 2001. He started 3 different energy initiatives where he's asked for money to develop free energy devices. He called it Seize Power. He called it Project Orion. He called it Serious Disclosure Technologies. He called it Space Energy Access Systems. Same thing. He's redone the same thing about 4 times over. And I've got all that documented in my book. Here's the original website that he designed in 2001. He shut that down and opened Project Aero in 2007. It's the exact same website, same content, same links, different name, and he claimed to have raised so much money with all of this, and he's still doing it now, as we speak.
Charges about £3,000 and £4,000 for his courses.
Yeah, yeah. I've heard that Greer's worth $14 million. That's what I've heard. And his witnesses talk about Science Applications International Corporation, who was sued by Dr. Judy Wood in relation to their cover-up of certain facts about 9/11. Greer knows all about SAIC, yet he will not talk about what happened to the towers. I've got this whole transcript here. I can play you the clip, but we're already well over time. So Greer is covering up. Greer, in other words, my point here is, I'll say it now, I'll probably say it again at the end. Greer is meant to be disclosing things. He is the disclosure person. He's not a president, he's not a politician. He is a guy running a website, going around the US, doing talks about disclosure, about the alien issue. Yet, he will not tell you what I've told you about 9/11, which is factual, provable, went to court. He will not talk about that. Right? Yes. And it is the same. I'll just play this clip, because this is what has been. It's very short, this is only a couple of minutes.
I was introduced to the late Dr. Werner von Braun in the U.S., the father of rocketry. In my first meeting with him, during that first 3.5 hours, he said to me, "Carol, you will stop the weaponization of space." And I said, you know, teachers don't stop until June. He said, "No, you have to understand, this is February, and we have to prevent the weaponization of space because there is a lie being told to everyone that the weaponization of space is now first being based upon the evil empire, the Russians. There are many enemies," he said, "against whom we're going to build this space-based weapon system. The first of whom was the Russians, which was existing at that time. Then there would be terrorists. Then there would be terrorists. Then there would be terrorists. Then there would be third world countries. Now we call them rogue nations or nations of concern. Then there would be asteroids." And then he would repeat to me over and over, "And the last card, the last card, the last card would be the extraterrestrial threat." Well, at the time, I kind of laughed when he said asteroids, and when he said extraterrestrials, I knew I wasn't going to deal with that subject. And now we hear in the news just today, this week, that they've slid in another enemy. Only this time we're going to protect our satellites. In other words, we have to have some reason to spend these trillions, to waste these dollars on a space-based weapon system, and they're all lies.
So this is the point. And what's happening now is you're getting this To the Stars Academy, and you've got this Louis Elizondo guy talking about this advanced threat assessment program in relation to studying UFOs. But this is what Carol Rosin was talking about. This is the Independence Day film, as you see from the caption. Same city. Empire State Building is destroyed. The only difference here is that in Independence Day there's an enormous flying saucer hovering over the building. I personally, I don't know about you, I can't ignore those similarities. They're trying to perception manage everyone. And Stephen Greer is playing his part in that process, as is Stephen Bassett. He is also won't talk about 9/11. He will not mention that the World Trade Center was in fact destroyed by a directed energy weapon, which is known about by Applied Research Associates and Science Applications International Corporation. He was asked this question directly by a chap that I know in 2017, and that's me on the stage with him. And he just started talking about architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth. No, not anymore. I've got a recording of that. So yeah, I've mentioned this to TTSA. So they're trying to perception manage things. That is being run by the CIA. You can watch Dark Journalist report on that if you want. That To the Stars Academy, my advice is, if you want any advice, if you're interested in it, just ignore it. It's run by the CIA. There will be no disclosure of any value from that initiative. Same with Edgar Mitchell. He worked for the CIA. He talked about aliens and Roswell. He worked for the CIA. He says it himself in a video. I've got the clip here, but I haven't run enough time. When I pointed out to Colin Andrews, he said that what I said about Edgar Mitchell, you know, threatening to kill people, which is what he did. We've got a recording of that. He said it was repugnant and with no evidence base. And I sent him the clip with Mitchell actually threatening to shoot somebody, and Colin Andrews didn't reply. So this is disclosure. This is my point. Colin Andrews is the sort of person that should be saying, God, I didn't know that about Edgar Mitchell. I never realised he threatened to shoot somebody and told somebody else that they'd get their head blown off, as in Bruce DePalma, if they played around with free energy. These are the people that are supposed to be doing the disclosure or supporting it. Nick Pope, another one. He said, that's what he says on his website, paid spokesperson. He actually says that on the title of his website. Yeah, he's one of the pundits, he's on all this. He supports the official story of 9/11. He says it was done by Muslim terrorists. And I've got a clip of him saying that. He gets into the papers.
He's peering over alien from America.
Yeah, he's on every week. Yeah, so here's the clip. I won't play it all. But this is the clip by Anthony J. Hilda, where Hilda gets it a bit wrong. But
Hope, formerly with the Ministry of Defense in England. Nick, may we use this on film?
Yeah, certainly.
Okay. One always asks the question, why are we at war, both Britain and the United States, against Afghanistan? Why?
We are not at war with Afghanistan. We are, however, at war with elements of Al-Qaeda and the Taliban on the basis that they are not only terrorists, but they are exporting that terrorism to the Western world, as we've seen on many occasions.
When do they export terrorism to the Western world?
Al-Qaeda has exported terrorism on numerous occasions, the USS Cole, the embassy bombs, 9/11, and all sorts of other attacks.
Wait, when you say 9/11, 9/11, according to most people who have done a thorough investigation, is an inside job.
No, it's not.
You say no.
I worked for government for 21 years. I know what governments do, I know what governments don't do. And, I've looked at both sides of this. I've looked at conspiracy theories. I've looked at the 9/11 Commission report.
Can you tell me how a building could come down with simply the burning of jet fuel, which jet A fuel burns at about 700 degrees, to melt steel? It's going to take 2,200. How could that defies logic?
This is one of the popular misconceptions of 9/11. For the building to collapse, you don't need the steel support structures to melt, which, as you say, does happen at a higher temperature than aviation fuel burns. What you do need is for the steel to lose its structural integrity, and that happens at a much lower temperature. So the physics and the engineering is not in. I've spoken to people who.
So you get the idea. That was Nick Pope saying that steel loses its structural strength. What actually happened is the buildings turned mostly to dust before they hit the ground. And anybody that watches the videos can see that. Yet this guy is meant to be a disclosure guy. And to emphasise the point, he said a few years ago, this quote's come from Colin Andrews' website, I had to refute the bizarre idea that the formations, as in crop formations, which I just showed you a few slides of, were caused by the testing of space-based directed energy weapons, and dispel suggestions that media coverage of the issue had been stifled by the use of denoisers. So he was apparently asked to refute the bizarre idea of the use of directed energy weapons in crop formation.
As far as I'm concerned, Nick Pope is just disinformation.
Correct.
Because after approximately 20 years
Correct.
of investigating UFOs, he hasn't come to a conclusion.
Correct.
I can confirm that.
And the point I'm trying to make is that most of the UFO circuit is not that much different to that. And I've written all that extensively in my books, and some of the people here that won't talk. As Maureen mentioned, David Eichner will no longer talk about 9/11. So you get to the point where when an honest but ignorant person learns an uncomfortable truth, they either cease to be ignorant or they cease to be honest. I forget who's, that's a slightly modified version of somebody else's quote, but it's true. And that's what I found with the UFO research community in general. They don't say, oh yeah, Apollo can't have landed on the moon. Yeah, now you mention it, and now I've looked at it. They back it up. And in fact, Bob Lazar did it in a recent interview on Joe Rogan, claiming that Apollo landed on the moon.
The Netflix popular every minute.
Pardon?
Was it Netflix?
Yes, yeah. He was on Joe Rogan podcast.
Did they land beside the Lancasters?
Sorry?
Did they land beside the Lancasters that were on the moon? Did you see that?
Maybe. So, my bag really is that, I posted an article a couple of years ago, which I called it Agenda 22. And I stated that the goal of my efforts in finding and showing people the truth, what that is, I hope that by the 22nd century, all humans will be free and sovereign, There will be no slavery and no exploitation. All people will have access to responsible use of free energy, cheap non-toxic health treatments, and even star travel if they wish. There will be no advantage for anyone believing a particular set of ideas, that they will be free to believe or not to believe what they like with no penalties or restrictions. People will understand the difference between belief and knowledge, and they will value knowledge more highly than belief. Right? So that's the big problem here. We get all this talk about beliefs. Do you believe in UFOs? No. I actually do research to find evidence to prove what's happened in a particular case. No group will be able to influence knowledge or beliefs for their own gain, and no group or individual will be controlled by any other unless they wish to be controlled. Self-determination in a way never seen on Earth before. That's what I want to happen. These goals will not be reachable while we're influenced by psychopaths, liars, and ignorant people, and those who are not willing to admit that they've made a mistake. And that's basically just a very, I tried to sort of put this into a big picture. That's what I ended up with. You've got to look at, crop circles, consciousness, religion, secret space program, UFOs, Apollo hoax, oil and the energy cartel, banking, international, it's all connected. You can't ignore any one field. And so a secret space program, I'm convinced, exists. I don't know exactly what form it takes, but the evidence shows that. Human consciousness is not restricted to the body alone. I think everyone should develop an appreciation for that if they haven't already. Control of all types of energy, electrical, magnetic, conscious and life energy, has been developed to a very high level by those running the planet. And it's been weaponized. The Apollo missions were a hoax. Weather modification and control exists, and talk of CO2 and global warming is a lie. It's a lie. And it's been promoted to advance the global control agenda in the form of Agenda 21, if you've not looked at that, and that's in one of my other books. I haven't got any copies of that book here because I sold out, but again, it's a free download. And most of the organisations which are in our world now and run things, they need to be just completely, rebooted basically and turned into something else. Because they can't, the way that they work at the moment is not compatible with knowing the truth about what I've shown you here today. So that is basically it. We've been attempts at UFO disclosure since at least 1950. Nothing has really much changed in my view. People who aren't actually co-opted or by the CIA are heavily influenced by those that are co-opted. And the armies of trolls out there trying to just shoot a lot of this down or say it's not true or whatever, and they promote cases with flimsy evidence, and they repeat old information as new, which is the case with this Admiral Wilson stuff. A lot of that stuff came out well over 10 years ago, and it's now being represented as if it's new information. It's not, and you can find out that it's not new if you do the research. So that is basically it, really. We've run a bit over time, and I think Kennedy, I think he got to know some stuff. I'm not sure how much. So it's now over to you to do your own disclosure to yourself. I don't think anybody's going to do it for you.
Okay. Well, thanks very much, Fred.
Thank you very much for listening. If anybody's got any energy left, we'll take some questions.
We're going to do, can we have
after I've given his presentation.
Yeah, Maureen wants to present it. So.
All right, okay.
I've got a presentation for you.
Thank you very much.
This little alien dropped in. See how good you might like him.
This is one of these hopping things, is it?
Yeah, you can throw it against the
wall.
wall.
Oh, it hops.
Yeah. And also to help you with your next new book.
Okay.
We'll give you a Truthigano book and a Truthigano.
Thank you very much. That's very kind.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
And what Andrew didn't have time to cover is all in this book.
Yeah.
So, and he'll sign the copies.
Yeah, if anybody wants to sign it,
several
anybody's got the energy to stay and have it signed, I'll sign it.
Yeah.
Do you think there's sort of much links to like the occult and like when
yes.
you look at like Aleister Crowley's Lamb?
That I think comes into the side of conscious energy, manipulation of conscious energy, which is, I think if you start to look at black magic, that's what it's to do with. It's how you manipulate this life force energy and this sort of spiritual energy. And yeah, people like Aleister Crowley, or Crowley as some people like to say, yeah, And you know, you probably saw the image in that's being put out with that entity called Lamb, which looks like a grey alien, which Aleister Crowley drew in 1930s or 40s or whatever. So that's quite unusual.
The guy who started JPL.
Sorry?
The guy who started JPL.
Jack Parsons, yeah, he was a follower of Aleister Crowley, wasn't he? Yeah. Carl James has written a bit about that in his book, Science Fiction and the Hidden Global Agenda. So yes, the occult symbolism, Masonic symbolism, that factors into all of this somewhere.
Bohemian Grove is evidence of that, where they're trying to get bankers and people in power around the world. If you listen to what the priests are saying, I think they're invoking dark spirits.
I agree.
To go over them and influence them. Because the dark spirits want to hold the planet up, as well as dark evil.
I agree.
That's why
this gentleman here, sorry.
I've heard something that in Germany, 1930s, there was this group called the Vril Society.
Yes.
Like a spiritualist channeling group, and there was this young woman with a long flexion black hair who was supposedly giving information to the Nazis, and that's how they got their anti-gravity technology and stuff, and then it was passed on through Operation Paperclip. Anything in that?
I don't know. I've read some of that stuff as well, and there's talk of a landing on the moon in 1920 and a landing on Mars in 1962, which was by, as you say, the Vril Society or the Vril people. I don't know what to make of that. Again, if you read Nick Cook's book, he talks about the case of Victor Schauberger, and he wasn't part of the Vril Society, to my understanding. And so I do think there was research into saucer-type technology done in Nazi Germany. I'm not sure exactly what form it took. I write a little bit about that in the Secret Space Program book. I think if I mention the Vril Society at all, it's only like in one sentence. So yeah, I've read that stuff, don't quite know what to make of it. Maybe there was contact going on there, and maybe, you know, it did influence Hitler to talk about this Aryan race, you know, I'm not sure.
Getting back to the moon, do you think there's any truth in this story that's helium-3 and avoidance?
I think that's probably, they could probably measure that spectroscopically if you use a spectroscope. I think so that probably is true. But helium-3, again, it's just that they're saying, oh, you could use it to create hydrogen or something, or use it for a hydrogen.
We're supposed to be able to use it for what we use uranium for, without the waste product.
We use it for what, sorry?
We use depleted uranium for atomic energy.
Right, yes, so yeah, they use
that. They could use that instead.
I think they're trying to claim they could use it for a type of fusion energy, I think.
Helium fusion.
That's it, isn't it? Yeah. But that's, you don't need to use fusion energy, you know. If you look at fusion reactors as a general thing, they've always been 20 years in the future. And since the 50s, and they're still 20 years in the future, even now.
There's one in Oxford, but it's not very tokamak.
You can get it to produce a net input for about 5 nanoseconds or something, can't you? A net output of however many joules or watts. But
from my research with the crop circles, I certainly believe there's some pranksters who plant the wood. Others are being employed by the MI5 to cover or give disinformation out. I'm open to the energy weapon idea from satellites or the TR-3B to give out disinformation. But from my research, and I've gone to Avery over many years, and they actually grow wheat, so I know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I've actually seen a crop bent on the second or third node. I think it was the second node and nowhere else, so you couldn't do that with plant.
That's right.
Now I'm not sure if an energy weapon could do that mind either.
Well, I talk
about 20 to 30 centimetres above the ground.
Well, I think what it might be is what they're doing is they're creating a gravity field. Right. So if you imagine you could create a force of gravity which is 6 inches above the ground and stops. So above that you've got, you know, higher gravity than you have, you know, below that.
Target second node.
You could. I think you could do it to that fine level. If you've got a gravity field which you can control in that way and simulate there being a weight on there, you know, maybe you could do that.
Out of interest, though, I'll accept that as a possibility. Are you open to the fact there may be some other force at play doing a minority? Because I've actually seen an orange orb down 100 acres, Eastfield, with a group of travellers, and the BBC film crew filmed it. And when they came down the hill, I said, "Did you get that?" And they looked stunned, and they said, "Yeah." "Did you get any noise?" "No." And it was an orange orb going over Adams Grade, Long Barrow, going over Nap Hill, and past the
These have been filmed, haven't they? I mean, there's Colin Andrews.
And the last thing is Charlie Mallet
Charles Mallett, yeah.
Oh, you know him.
Yeah,
He
not personally,
told
but I know
me-
his name, yeah.
Yeah, in the crop circle, he actually saw an orange orb come off the ground. And finally, when I've been down there, I've had people show me white orbs of light dancing over the crop circles, and that's not photoshopped.
Right.
They just filmed it a few hours before I got there. I think they're telling the truth. So I just wonder if a minority is a positive conscious energy getting back to the aquifer.
Could be, you know, I don't,
programming the water with, you know,
yeah, I don't
secrets.
rule that out, and I go into that a little bit more in the book than I've had a chance to today. And the orbs thing, yes, that's very, very interesting. And I think that the orbs have also been seen in 1 or 2 cases of cattle mutilation. So, is this the non-lethal weapon that's being used? You know, does it actually glow orange when it's in operation, or is it, as you suggest, some type of conscious energy which is, you know, benevolent or benign? And maybe there was some type of program to put messages in crop circles. You know, it's a strange way to communicate. But maybe it's true. Maybe these forces chose to communicate in that way for whatever reason, and then the military got wind of it and thought, we can't be having this. We've got to, you know, muddy the waters of this, and then they started doing stuff. Yeah, I'm certainly open to that possibility. You know.
Andy Moussan, do you think he's stupid or just a little bit gullible?
I think he's just a bit of an opportunist.
Yeah,
I think he's, you know, I think he knows how to make money out of the issue. And I mean, some of the stuff he's come out with is pretty interesting, you know. But
absolutely, and I just wonder why he gets involved with things like the Roswell slides, which were quite obviously built.
Yeah, exactly. So you know, you can only say, well, he must be in it to make.
Because I quite like some of his older stuff, but
too.
in more recent years, he's just like, and I'm thinking, is he an idiot? So is he just like a bit gullible?
I don't know, but I know that Lloyd Pye didn't like him, so you know, I'll tell you that much. But yeah, I don't know Richard, but I feel the same. That what you said. Yeah, any other questions or comments? £10 for the books. I was saying download them for free. Yes, Andy?
Do you think any of the Apollo astronauts actually went to the moon using non-rocket technology?
I think probably not, because if they did, they'd kind of have to like be a double cover-up. In other words, they'd have to say, we actually went to the moon, but in a secret craft, and they wouldn't, you know, they would have to have clearance to be aboard that craft, etc., etc. So I think it makes far more sense that they were mind controlled or hypnotised, whatever you want to call it, to make them believe they walked on the moon, but actually they did it all in the studio. But there may have been other missions to the moon, they may have taken some shots there and released those as being part of Apollo perhaps, I don't know. Currently I don't think that's what's happened, but again, I wouldn't say I've studied every single Apollo photograph, whether there are 6,000 of them or however many there are, 11,000, I can't remember. I think it was shot in a studio, none of the astronauts went there. If they have been with other missions, I don't think there's any photographs or public videos being released as if it came from the Apollo mission.
Do you think NASA will ever tell us the truth about Apollo?
Well, probably not, but you know, then you've got the Interstellar film, haven't you, the Christopher Nolan film, where, you know that clip, don't you, where he says, oh, we've had to take all the federal textbooks out and replace them with the real information.
Yeah.
You know, so I don't know.
It's interesting as well, the movies. I mean, you got The First Man last year, there's another space movie coming out.
Yeah.
They're trying to reinforce what happened 50 years ago.
Yeah.
Do you think the International Space Station's approach?
I think
they're using the vomit comet.
Oh, lovely, thanks.
The clips are very short.
I think there is disinformation being put out regarding the International Space Station. As regards the International Space Station, you can see it. If you know where to look, you can observe it for yourself. Oh, did you? Oh, yeah, give me 30 there, though. Oh, he's got 3, right, okay, sorry. I'm looking at that, and thank you very much. What was I saying? So, the ISS, you can observe it. So you can definitely see that it's real. You can actually observe the structure of it through. Yeah, you can if you've got a good enough telescope. There's people that have made YouTube videos. And they're not NASA people, they're just enthusiasts. So you can definitely see it. And you can see its shape. Whether there's anybody inside it or not, you know, you could make that argument.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure there is somebody inside it. And I think they've tried to use, because you find that a lot of these people that are questioning the authenticity of the ISS videos are flat earthers. A large proportion of them are. I'm not saying they all are, but a large proportion of them.
Do you think there's a red Tesla heading to Mars?
Well, that's another. Why would there be? You know, why would you want to put a car into space? It's weird, isn't it? I couldn't really work that one out, I must admit. I thought it was totally weird.
But he's a shell, though, isn't he?
I think so, yeah.
For rocket technology, he's a shell.
I think so, yes. Yeah. So I think he knows about the sequence stuff, or some of it. I think he knows.
Is there any free energy devices available?
Free energy devices, yes, there are several. There are several that have been made available, but the problem with all of them that I've seen is the best you're going to get out of them is that they'll maybe run for an hour, a couple of hours, and then they'll break, or they'll need to be taken apart and new bearings put in or something, whatever it is. So as I've said in a couple of postings, if you want to have a free energy device that's reliable, you need to get it into a big factory and have maybe £500,000 to make it into something that can be put into operation 24/7. Because a lot of these people say, oh, you've invented a free energy device, why aren't you running your house on it then? And the reason I think is because the quality of the components and the manufacturing is relatively low, so it doesn't run well. And I've actually gone to see a guy based in Shrewsbury who showed me a device he'd made, and that fitted into that category. It would work, but only for very short periods of time, and then it would break. So this is one of the problems. There was a good device published, shown about 4 or 5 years ago by a Turkish guy called Yildiz. If you put Yildiz device onto YouTube, you'll see it running. Again, after about an hour it would heat up and he had to switch it off and take it all apart and put some new component in it. And there is another video by John Bedini where he talks about a device which was actually sold in 1950s, I think it was. And people used to run their camper vans off it. But it used this Bosch generator. And then again it would only run for maybe a total of, I don't know, 300 hours, something like that. And then the generator would break and it needed the commutator replacing, and you couldn't get the parts. And so it fell into disuse and it was forgotten about. And that was I think it was in the 40s or 50s.
No more questions? Hey!